Now through this evening, conditions remain fairly similar, a few lingering showers to begin with, but then it's all changed from the southwest as this area of showery rain pushes in, gradually edging northwards across the country through the early hours of Thursday morning. Within this, there will be some heavy bursts. Again, the odd rumble of thunder is possible as it trundles its way northwards through the latter part of the night and into Thursday. Northern Ireland in particular could see some very heavy and prolonged rain for a time on Thursday, and again on Friday with more rain on the cards for western parts of the UK. But back to Thursday, quite a lot of cloud around, temperatures once again well above average despite the breezy conditions, mid to high teens and possibly again just about touching the low 20s. Thursday evening, that showery rain continues to push northwards across Scotland, clearing elsewhere, but leaving quite a lot of cloud in its wake. And I mentioned further rain in the west on Friday, but temperatures still remaining well above average for the time of year, with breezy conditions for most, and that remains into the weekend.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
find its voice
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales,
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio,
and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome to GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero, and Mark Longhurst.
Yes, me too. And Rishi Sunak as well, because he's going to be at the dispatch box in a few minutes' time for a new Prime Minister going head-to-head with the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, at Prime Minister's Questions.
And after another historic day at Westminster, Rishi Sunak completed his new cabinet, but almost immediately hit fresh with the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. You're looking at women and equality questions right now, but as soon as the Prime Minister Questions starts, we will take you live there.
And just to update you, in the past few minutes, the announcement from the new government that the budget plans are being put back to November the 17th as they try to balance the books.
And we want to hear from you, as ever. Get in touch with us at gbviews at gbnews.uk. What do you want the new government to do for you?
So, what can we expect from the Prime Minister as he stands at the dispatch box for the first time?
We're joined by our fantastic panel at Westminster, Shadow Minister Jenny Chapman and Robert Courts, Conservative MP for Witney and West Oxfordshire. Good afternoon to you both. Great to see you. So we know that tough economic decisions lie ahead. I'd like both of you to answer this, but I'll start with you, Robert. What taxes would you like to see go up, or what cuts would you like to see take place to plug the gap? Could be up to 30, could be 40 billion.
Well, this is obviously a really difficult question, a really difficult time for us. I mean, the thing that we can have real confidence in now, and we're going to get detail on this from the new Prime Minister and from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, they'll need to sit down and they'll need to go through the books, as it were, in detail, look at each department, look at areas where there may be efficiencies that can be taken, and also look at a way that they can increase revenue. Because the thing that the Prime Minister is going to be absolutely clear about, that he's going to be absolutely determined to show, is that he has a real grip and that you have stable, competent, calm government for these challenging times.
Any competent, calm government returns. But where would you like to see the public spending axe fall, or which taxes would you like to see go up? There's a public spending black hole.
Yeah, I mean, it's no Conservative wants to see any taxes go up. I think we have to accept that, there is going to have to be some hard fiscal decisions taken. And as to which particular ones, I think that we've got to wait and see what the government comes up with. We've got to wait to see the people who've got the books, who've gone through them in real detail and are able to give us the real definite answer to that, rather than me speculating now.
And Jenny Chapman, how does Keir Starmer take this new Prime Minister to task? Clearly there are difficult questions for him over Suella Braverman, and indeed now the timing of the budget and what we're likely to find on November the 17th.
Well, I mean, the first thing I just wanted to say to add a couple of very simple things that the government ought to be doing right now. One is abolishing non-dom status, which would raise just over £3 billion every year. And the other one is on the tax status of private schools, where we'd be spending that money on providing breakfast clubs for primary school children. So there are some things that the government could and should be doing today that would really support families up and down the country. As for what Keir should be challenging Rishi Sunak on, I think he has to ask him about this extraordinary appointment of Suella Braverman, who just a week ago was forced to resign because she'd broken security rules. And now he reappoints her as what looks like part of some grubby deal with his own party to avoid having to lose another leadership election. And I do hope that Keir asks Rishi Sunak about that.
Courts, a grubby deal?
So I think that's slightly unfair. I mean, I think what the Prime Minister is trying to do is, it's my point that I made a moment ago about showing that we've got calm, competent government. What he's going to want to do is to show that, the party is united, because that's the way that we're going to deliver for the things people want us to be working on. They'll want us to demonstrate that we've got a grip of government, that we are able to deal with the challenging financial circumstances we have. And to do that, he's got to bring everyone together. That's what you're seeing the Prime Minister doing. And Suella Braverman's got a very clear, strong agenda. She's determined to deliver on some of the things that really matter to people out there, like making sure that we're controlling immigration, for example. So with that strong person in the Home Office and that very strong, competent, clear, principled leadership of the Prime Minister, I really think we're going to see a new chapter today, and this is much better news for the country as a whole.
I mean, if I could just come back on that, I don't think it is competent or a sign of strength to be forced by your parliamentary party to reappoint somebody who was sacked for breaking the rules, when that person is going to have to work closely with security services, with the police, on fighting terrorism and organised crime, and they themselves broke security rules. Don't think that shows strength. I think that shows weakness.
So I take Jenny's point, of course, but I think we also do have to recognise that the Home Secretary has now, Suella, she did resign at the time. She apologised for that. She accepted it, and the letter was very clear about this. She accepted what she'd done wrong, and she paid the penalty for that by resigning. But I do think now we've got to look at who's the best person for the job, and I think for the reasons I've given, she is.
Robert, that we need more immigration to boost growth.
So there's a lot of different ways in which we can boost growth. You're going to be hearing from the government with a real detailed plan about how that happens. We also have to make sure people are concerned about immigration. There's no two ways about that. They want to see that we have control. They want to see that the system that we have is operating in everybody's best interests. There will, of course, be times when you want the brightest and the best from wherever in the world to come and help out. But we also need to make sure that we are training people in the UK as well. So you're going to see that programme from the government, but we have to make sure that we're demonstrating that we are concerned about and are acting on and have gripped the issues that people are worried about.
Chapman, looking at the bigger picture, has Rishi Sunak now bought this government enough time, the 2 years until the next general election, despite, of course, Keir Starmer still pushing for that, and that will be very much dependent on November the 17th?
I think that the Conservative Party feels as if it's walked back from the brink of certain annihilation. You can hear that in Robert's tone today, but actually the fundamental problems are still there. They remain the same. The party doesn't have an agenda that's going to fix our economy or support working people. People are still being faced with, on average, a £500 a month increase on their mortgage payments. This is just not something that the public can bear. And actually, you do see growing support for a general election up and down the country. And the reason for that is that nobody voted for this agenda, and there is no legitimacy now to this government to do the things that it says it wants to do. This is a problem. It's a problem of democracy, and it's one that I'm afraid is only fixed by a general election.
So it won't surprise you, of course, I disagree strongly with Jenny about that. No, I mean, look, you know, the issue is, it's about whether you're gripping on the issues that people need. I'll explain that we are. We have a very clear, strong mandate that comes from the 2019 general election. We have a 70-seat majority, and that manifesto mandate is there. And you see in the Prime Minister and the appointments he's made to his cabinet and the way he's gripping it, that he is absolutely clear that we're going to be delivering on that manifesto mandate. And that's what we need people to do. We don't want politicians to be arguing about politics with other politicians for months, rather than tackling the economic issues that Jenny quite rightly draws attention to. That's what I want to be focusing on. Whereas, of course, for self-evident reasons, Labour Party are going to keep continuing to argue for an election.
But we need an election because this Prime Minister has no democratic legitimacy, and that is just as plain as the nose on your face. You're not delivering on your 2019 election manifesto, not even on the very simple things that you promised, like ending this Brexit row with Europe. You're keeping it going with your Northern Ireland Protocol row. Why are you doing that? You should be absolutely focused on finding solutions, on resolving the issues that are facing ordinary working people. You've put their taxes up. You've failed to have any growth for the last 12 years to speak of. Look at what's happening in our schools. Look how many people are waiting for treatment on the NHS. Everywhere you look, there is mess, and you look at the top of the government and you see chaos. And you cannot have a country like ours, in the situation we are now, being led in this sheer chaotic manner. It's no wonder the public are sick to the back teeth with it all. They do want an election, and I think that the Prime Minister ought to be big enough, and if he's that confident about himself, then he ought to give them that chance to vote.
Quick answer from both of you. Hopefully we'll get to it before we go to PMQs. What do you think the weakest point that Keir Starmer is? How do you does Rishi plan to attack him? And same question to you about Rishi Sunak, Jenny, but very, very brief.
So Keir fundamentally just doesn't have a plan. He's very good at pointing out where things are going wrong, but he's really bad at saying what it is that he will do. You're going to see a real contrast for that with Rishi, someone who's got detail and grip.
Well, we do have a plan. I've already given a couple of examples of it in this interview. But obviously Rishi's weaknesses are that he has no mandate and that he hasn't faced the scrutiny of an election and won it, and that he has no idea what's going on the ground for working people in this country. That is a really fundamental problem for a government that needs to turn the country round, and that, I'm afraid, is just not sustainable, and that's why we think we need to have an election.
Jenny and Robert, thank you very much indeed. Coping with the falling leaves, the wind and the sun going in and out. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. The Speaker is on his feet. It's Rishi Sunak's first Prime Minister's question time.
Question one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
Can I just say, don't damage the furniture. Cheer him by all means, but don't damage. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister on his new post and indeed as being the first Prime Minister of a South Asian heritage, which will be a cause of great pride among many of my constituents. I also have some pride in welcoming a fellow Saints Southampton supporter into number 10. During his prime ministerial campaigns, the last prime ministerial campaign he ran,
Which he lost.
he pledged to prohibit any development of onshore wind, which is now the cheapest form of power available to us in the country. Now he is Prime Minister. Will he change his mind on that point?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words and look forward to seeing him at St Mary's. Although I know my friend, the Leader of the House, may have something to say about our love of Saints. Look, when it comes to energy policy, I stick by what we said in our manifesto, Mr. Speaker. The important thing is, though, to focus on our long-term energy security. That means more renewables, more offshore wind, and indeed more nuclear. That's what this government will deliver.
I'm surprised, Mr. Speaker, to be asking the question, and I know you're shocked, Mr. Speaker, too, because I know that you, like many people, thought I would have already been offered a ministerial post.
Let me tell you, I didn't hold my breath. Philip Davis.
Go figure, as Joe Biden might say. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on becoming Prime Minister? He's absolutely the right person for the job, and I wish him every success in post, and as he knows, he's got my full support. His two immediate predecessors made levelling up a key part of their agenda. Would he reaffirm his commitment to levelling up and start, as he means to go on, by approving the levelling up fund bid for Bingley in my constituency?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his warm remarks. I can confirm he must be the only person, Mr. Speaker, who texted me to say that he did not want a job in the last 24 hours. But I can give him my cast iron commitment to levelling up, particularly in Yorkshire, which he and I share. Obviously, he'll know I can't comment on individual bids, but by the end of the year, an announcement is expected on the success, and I wish him every luck with that.
Let's come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I welcome the Prime Minister. The first British Asian Prime Minister is a significant moment in our national story. And it's a reminder that for all the challenges we face as a country, Britain is a place where people of all races and all beliefs can fulfil their dreams. That's not true in every country, and many didn't think that they would live to see the day when it would be true here. It's part of what makes us all so proud to be British. Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind and indeed generous welcome to the dispatch box. I look forward to Prime Minister's question time with him, and I know that we will have, no doubt, robust exchanges, but I hope that they can also be serious and grown up. So I look forward to it. Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account. Far from soft on crime, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service for 5 years. With Home Secretaries to take on terrorists and serious organised crime. And I know firsthand how important it is that we have a Home Secretary whose integrity and professionalism are beyond question. So, have officials raised concerns about his decision to appoint her?
Mr. Speaker, I just addressed the issue with the Home Secretary, but he talked about fighting crime. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that he would welcome. I would hope that as we look forward, he would welcome the news today that there are over 15,000 new police officers on our street. And the Home Secretary will be supporting them to tackle burglaries. The party opposite will be backing the lunatic protesting fringe that are stopping working people going about their lives.
Yes, Starmer. Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened carefully. That was clearly not a no. We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election. There's a new Tory at the top, but as always with them, party first, country second. Yesterday, on the steps of Downing Street, he also admitted what the whole country knows. The Tories have crashed the economy, and now somebody has to pay for their mess. I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot, but those with the broadest shoulders must step up. Does he agree?
No. Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman talked about party first and country second. Perhaps he could explain to us why it was a few years ago he was supporting the member for Islington North. Mr. Speaker, my record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable. That is the values of our compassionate party. We did it in COVID and we will do that again.
Mr. Speaker, he says he'll protect the most vulnerable. Let's test that. The government currently allows very rich people to live here but register abroad for tax purposes. I don't need to explain to the Prime Minister how non-dom status works. He already knows all about that. It costs the Treasury £3.2 billion every year. Why doesn't he put his money where his mouth is and get rid of it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been honest. We will have to take difficult decisions to restore economic stability and confidence. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set that out in an autumn statement in just a few weeks. But what I can say, as we did during COVID, we will always protect the most vulnerable. We will do this in a fair way. But what I can say, I am glad, Mr. Speaker, that the party opposite, the honourable gentleman, has finally realised that spending does need to be paid for. Party opposite. This government is going to restore economic stability and we will do it in a fair and compassionate way.
I know he's been away for a few weeks, but he should have listened to what's been going on the last two. But anyway, I have to say, I'm surprised he's still defending non-dom status. He pretends he's on the side of working people, but in private he says something very different. Over the summer, he was secretly recorded at a garden party in Tunbridge Wells, boasting to a group of Tory members that he personally moved money away from deprived areas to wealthy places instead. rather than apologise or pretend that he meant something else, why doesn't he now do the right thing and undo the changes that he made to those funding formulas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the right honourable gentleman rarely leaves North London. But if he does, he will know that there are deprived areas in our rural communities, in our coastal communities, and across the south, and this government will relentlessly support them because we are a government that will deliver for people across the United Kingdom. But Mr. Speaker, he mentioned the last few weeks. I am the first to admit that mistakes were made, and that's the reason I am standing here. But that is the difference between him and me. This summer, I was being honest about the difficulties that we were facing. But when he ran for leader, he promised his party he would borrow billions and billions of pounds. I told the truth for the good of the country. He told his party what it wanted to hear. Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
Mr. Speaker, I think everyone should watch the video and make their own minds up. In public, he claims he wants to level up the north, but then he boasts about trying to funnel vital investment away from deprived areas. He says one thing and does another. But they're shouting. They're not my words. They're not my words. They're the words of the former chair of the Tory party, sacked yesterday for telling the truth about the Prime Minister. Even his own side know he's not on the side of working people. That's why the only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. So why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say, and call a general election?
Well, it'll take a long time to get through this paper if we carry on like this, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about mandates, about votes, about elections. It's a bit rich coming from the person who tried to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our country's history. Our mandate is based on a manifesto that we were elected on to remind him an election that we won and they lost. A mandate that says we want a stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders and levelling up. That is the mandate that I and this government will deliver for the British people.
Heather's not even asked her questions. You want more? Come on, Heather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my right honourable friend, our new Prime Minister, and also to thank our previous Prime Minister for the straightforward way she has handled her resignation, and I wish her and her family well for the future. Would my right honourable friend please use this, his first appearance of the dispatch box, to make it clear to the British Medical Council and the British Dental Association that as well as training, more training spaces opening up, that they must allow new doctors and dentists to work in the UK so that the good people of South Derbyshire can get treatment on the NHS?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. She's absolutely right. I'm pleased that there are 3,500 more doctors and over 9,000 more nurses working this year than last. But she's right, and we are working to simplify the registration for dentists in particular that are not trained here to practice here, and that's how we'll help deliver a long-term workforce plan for the NHS and ensure everyone can get the care they need.
Let's come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the new Prime Minister on becoming the first British Asian to hold the office. The significance and the symbolism of this achievement is to be warmly welcomed by everyone. Mr. Speaker, yesterday on the steps of Downing Street, the new Prime Minister promised to bring, and I quote, compassion to the challenges that we face today. So, on his first full day in the job, let's put that to the test. A winter of uncertainty is coming, and next April we'll see a cliff edge moment. Millions face a double whammy as the energy price guarantee is cut off, while households are hit by austerity 2.0 and a real terms cut to social security benefits that many rely on to survive. If people are actually to trust the new Prime Minister's words about compassion, will he today reassure people and guarantee that benefits will rise in line with inflation in his upcoming budget?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his, again, kind remarks. And what I can tell him is my record on this is clear. Through the difficult times that we faced in this country through COVID, I always acted in a way to protect the most vulnerable. That's because it is the right thing to do, and those are the values of our compassionate party. And I can absolutely reassure him and give him that commitment that we will continue to act like that in the weeks ahead.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's test that, because as Chancellor, the Prime Minister slashed universal credit and presided over the worst levels. Well, you know, for the hard of hearing on the Tory side, I might remind them that universal credit was cut by £20 a week. And presided over the worst levels of poverty in North West Europe. So I hope that he has learned from his mistakes and guarantees that benefits will rise in line with inflation. But speaking of mistakes, yesterday the Prime Minister appointed a Home Secretary who was forced to resign only last week for breaching the ministerial code, and who boasted that she dreamed of sending vulnerable asylum seekers to Rwanda. We all know why he appointed her: a sleazy backroom deal to shore up his own position. Far from being a fresh start, this is a return to the sleaze and scandal and ghosts of cabinets past. The Prime Minister promised to govern with integrity and humility. So if he has an ounce of either, will he admit his mistake and sack the Home Secretary without the delay?
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to actually have a call last night with the First Minister of Scotland. It was important that I spoke to her on my first day in office, because I wanted to express my desire to work constructively with the Scottish Government so that we can work together to deliver for the people of Scotland, and that is what I plan to do. And indeed, I hope crime is one of the things that we can collaborate on, because he will know that violent crime is rising in Scotland and police numbers are falling, whereas here we are increasing police numbers, Mr. Speaker. But I look forward to working with the Scottish Government on our shared challenges, because I believe in a strong United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, what a pleasure it was to welcome the Prime Minister to my constituency in the summer. He will know one of the burning issues in my constituency is the proposed waste incinerator at Westbury. With the government rightly reviewing its air quality targets, can I ask my right honourable friend to signal his intent to continue promoting public health, net zero and the environment by placing a moratorium on any more unwanted, unnecessary, toxic waste burners?
Prime Minister. I can tell my honourable friend, I know he's been a vociferous campaigner on this issue, as I learned over the summer. He'll know that local authorities determine these issues, but also to reassure him that all large incinerators in England must comply with strict emission limits and only receive permits if plants don't cause any damage to human health. And hopefully that is reassuring for him.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's reckless predecessor took a wrecking ball to nature, prompting millions of members of the RSPB, the National Trust and the Wildlife Trust to rise up in opposition. Yesterday, he promised to fix her mistakes as well as to uphold the party's 2019 manifesto. So if he is a man of his word, will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe, and instead maintain the moratorium that was pledged in that very manifesto that he has promised to uphold?
Well, I've already said I stand by the manifesto on that, but what I would say is that I'm proud that this government has passed the landmark Environment Act, putting more protection protection for the natural environment than we've ever had, with a clear plan to deliver. And I can give the Honourable Lady my commitment that we will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to welcome the Prime Minister to his place. Farmers in my constituency of Clwyd South are delighted that after 20 years they are once more able to sell Welsh lamb to the US market. Would the Prime Minister comment on the size and prospects of this market for our world-beating Welsh lamb?
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my colleague on the fantastic achievement. I can tell him that market is worth, I think, something like almost £40 million over the first few years. Enormous boost for our lamb farmers. I would just encourage the 300 million US consumers to give Yorkshire Swaledale a lamb a look in as well. But I know he and I, if we disagree on that, are united on the fact that we will unequivocally back British farming and British farmers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is certainly a topsy-turvy Tory government. A few days ago, I was going to put my question to the former Prime Minister, but my inbox has been full of emails from constituents of Lewisham East writing to me about their desperate situation of their wages simply not going far enough. I'm also receiving emails about rents going up, energy prices going up, mortgages going up, and of course the cost of living is already up. This week, my constituents are writing to me demanding a general election, and I absolutely agree with them. So can the Prime Minister tell me and my constituents when there will be a general election?
Mr. Speaker, we've already addressed that, but I would say, as I said in the summer, I said inflation is indeed the enemy. It makes everyone poorer, it erodes savings, and that's why it will be a priority of our government to grip and reduce inflation and provide support to those who need it as we do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This autumn, I'm launching my campaign to extend the Chilterns area of natural beauty across thousands of acres of scenic beauty, chalk streams, and valuable habitats that happen to surround the wonderful town of Hitchin in my constituency. Would the Prime Minister join me in celebrating areas protected by AONB status and indeed support my campaign to potentially extend them in rural Hertfordshire?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, because I know this is a matter of great importance to him and his constituents, and he's right to highlight the benefit that natural parks and AONBs can bring to our lives and our well-being. I understand actually that Natural England is considering an extension of the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty, and I know my honourable friend will be vigorously taking up his campaign with them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister to his place. A nurse would have to work over 20,000 years in order to match the vast wealth of this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister knows only too well that the super rich could easily afford to pay more in taxes. So rather than announce a new wave of cuts and austerity, wouldn't it be fairer for the Prime Minister to introduce wealth taxes on the very richest in our society?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will always support our hard-working nurses, and that's why, as Chancellor, we reintroduced the nurses' bursary and provided more training and introduced actually very strong pay increases. But as I committed to previously, as we approach the difficult decisions that confront us, we will do so in a way that is fair and is compassionate, because those are our values, and that's what we will deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's determination to be straight with people about the challenges we face as a country. Last week, the Care Quality Commission State of Care report on state of care in England showed our health system in gridlock. And I hear the same from my constituents, struggling to see a GP or waiting for treatment. So can I urge him to make unblocking the NHS a priority for him and his health secretary?
So, my honourable friend knows this subject obviously very well from her own experience, and I thank her for the work she did previously in the department. She's absolutely right about the challenge that confronts us. It's why we've put billions of pounds into busting the backlogs and the elective recovery fund, and are delivering funding and staffing to do that. But I look forward to working with her to deliver what we said in our manifesto, and that is a far stronger NHS.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd add my own congratulations to the Prime Minister on his appointment. We might not agree on everything, but I think we can all agree a more diverse politics can only be to the good. Now, we in these benches believe that Scotland's best future is independence in Europe. Keep it coming. Mr. Speaker, I really would urge the members opposite to show a little more respect. Because it's not just us. It's not just us. It's not just the SNP. And I will not be shouted down. It's not just the SNP. On the last opinion poll, 72% of the people of Scotland want back into the European Union. So if the Prime Minister is to maintain any credibility in the eyes of the people of Scotland, how long does he think he can deny Scotland's democracy?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his kind words. I mean, he talked about respect. I would gently urge him to respect the result of the referendum we had on this topic. But whilst we will disagree on that issue, I can tell him that I do remain committed to working constructively in partnership with the Scottish Government to deliver for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I visited worried Year 3 and 6 pupils to hear their suggestions to tackle road safety following a number of serious road accidents outside Boothroyd Academy in Dewsbury. They suggested the council should do more to help, that their parents should walk them to school to reduce traffic, and that commuters should slow down. Would my right honourable friend agree with me and with them that we all have a part to play in ensuring road safety outside our schools?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think it's fantastic that he's engaging with his younger constituents at Boothroyd Academy on such an important issue, and I know they will welcome his commitment to supporting them. And I agree with him. There are various things we can do. There's an updated highway code which strengthens pedestrian access. Local authorities can introduce lower speed limits, and we're increasing the number of school streets which restrict motorised traffic at busy times. And I look forward to hearing progress on this issue from him.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and said that he wanted to restore trust. Yet in the past 24 hours, we've seen that he's prepared to shamelessly swap red boxes for political support. And there are real serious consequences to all this horse trading. So I'd like him to be clear on this point. Did he seek or receive any advice on security concerns about the Right Honourable Member for South Staffordshire before his appointment to the government yesterday, given that he was sacked in 2019 for leaking sensitive information relating to our national security?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, he's talking about events that happened 4 years ago, and he's right that he raised the topic of national security, because members opposite 4 years ago were busily supporting the member for Islington North, who wanted to abolish the nuclear deterrent, who wanted to leave NATO, and who wanted to scrap our armed forces. We won't take any lectures on national security, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sincerely congratulate my right honourable friend and wish him every success. Over 3 years ago, my constituent Harry Dunn was killed in a tragic road accident, and I'd like to ask my right honourable friend to join me in congratulating Harry Dunn's family for the incredible campaign they've run for over 3 years, with huge support from all colleagues across the House on finally achieving justice for Harry.
Well, I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for her role, and indeed the former Foreign Secretary as well, and indeed colleagues from all over the House for the part they've played in bringing about this outcome. My thoughts are obviously with the family, and I join in her sentiments that this is very welcome.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. West Hertfordshire Hospital Trust in my area is still hoping to receive funds from the new hospitals programme, the same programme that is supposed to deliver the government's so-called 40 new hospitals. There's been a lot of speculation that the new Prime Minister and his Chancellor might seek to cut infrastructure projects. So can the Prime Minister confirm to me that my local hospital trust, as well as all of the other local hospital trusts that are set to benefit from the new hospitals programme, will in fact get that money? Yes or no?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor will set out our plans in the autumn statement shortly, but this is the government that put in place plans which will remain to significantly increase capital expenditure, and even though difficult decisions do need to be made, I think the country can rest assured that we will continue to invest in our future productivity and indeed invest in our public services like the NHS.
Wendy Ball.
Mr. Speaker, in my Aldridge Brown Hills constituency, we're at risk of 8,000 new homes being dumped in the constituency. Will my right honourable friend use the opportunity of this Prime Minister's question to reaffirm the government's commitment to protecting the Greenbelt and to adopting a really rigorous brownfield first policy?
Well, can I say thank you to my honourable friend for her question, and I can give her that assurance. She's absolutely right. We must protect our green belt, and we are adopting a brownfield first strategy. I'm pleased we had a record number of new homes built in the last year, but it's important that we build those homes in the right places.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst welcoming the new Prime Minister to his place, we remember that law-breaking was the order of the day in Downing Street during the pandemic. We will never forget that this current Prime Minister was fined by the police for attending a birthday party hosted by his next-door neighbour. As both a witness and a participant to that law-breaking, if the Privileges Committee investigation into the former Prime Minister calls him to give evidence, will he fully cooperate?
Mr. Speaker, of course, and I addressed these matters earlier this year.
Mr. Speaker, you will know that I fought hard to bring back Boris. In '97, I campaigned for Kenneth Clarke and then for Michael Portillo. So I can't always get it right. But you know, I do know about the West Midlands. I know that the West Midlands Mayor very much welcomes the reappointment of the Levelling Up Secretary, and that he looks forward to working with our new Prime Minister. So may I just ask him, what is his vision for levelling up?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question, and what I can say is our desire is to ensure that people, wherever they live in our fantastic country, have enormous pride in the place they call home and every opportunity to succeed. And you know what? It is the fantastic Mayor Andy Street who is delivering that for his constituents in the West Midlands.
That completes questions.
Assured debut. His MPs shouted more. It's a while since we've heard such a robust response on those backbenchers.
Yeah, Sir Keir Starmer trying to land the punches in terms of Suella Braverman, the new Home Secretary, and Sir Keir Starmer saying that clearly it was a question of an error of judgment that was rejected by the Prime Minister, saying that cracking down on criminals and securing borders was one of the government's main jobs at hand.
You can see the House of Commons there, MPs, many MPs leaving, but actually something rather important is about to take place. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has summoned Suella Braverman, the new Home Secretary, and we're going to hear that urgent question now.
Speaker, to ask a question to the Home Secretary about her resignation and reappointment.
Gone away.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was disappointed in leaving my last department last night, but I'd no longer be seeing the Right Honourable Lady across the dispatch box. I'm so glad she's put that right for me today. She's got a good memory, and as I know she'll recall from last week, I remember to recall from last week that my honourable friend, the member for Bassett Law, said in responding to the question tabled by the Right Honourable Lady, the questions relating to breaches of the ministerial code or related issues are a matter for the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Office, not the Home Office, which is why I'm here, Mr. Speaker, answering the question today and not the Home Secretary. Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Bassett Law, set out the circumstances regarding the departure of the Home Secretary last week. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment. She recognised her mistake. She took responsibility for her actions. The Ministerial Code allows for a range of sanctions where mistakes have been made. The Home Secretary recognised her mistake, raised the matter and stepped down. Her resignation was accepted by the then Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will be aware ministerial appointments are a matter solely for the Prime Minister as the Sovereign's principal adviser on the appointment, dismissal and acceptance of resignations of ministers. The Prime Minister was very clear in his speech to the nation yesterday that this government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. He has said he will work day in, day out to earn the trust of the country and to live up to the demands and expectations the public rightly have of their Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister expects all ministers to uphold the values and standards set by the Ministerial Code, as the public would rightly expect. As I've set out, the Home Secretary made an error of judgment. She recognised her mistake. She took accountability for her actions in stepping down. After consideration, the PM has decided, given the apology issued by the Home Secretary, to reappoint her to the government. They are now focused together on working to make our streets safer and to control our borders. But while we should learn from mistakes, we should also look to the future. The Prime Minister has appointed a team of ministers to lead this country through the issues the country faces. All ministers are bound by the Ministerial Code, and the Prime Minister expects his ministers to uphold the code and hold the highest standards. As I've noted, the Ministerial Code allows for a range of sanctions of breaches, and on the recommendation of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, the code was updated in May to make this clear. On an ongoing basis, we will need every minister, through our actions and in how we conduct ourselves, to demonstrate that we can continue to command this Prime Minister's confidence as we tackle the huge challenges of the country to come.
Yvette Cooper.
What you like.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are about security breaches and the protection of our national security. They are questions to the Home Secretary, who was here just 5 minutes ago and who left. Yesterday, the Prime Minister promised integrity, professionalism and accountability, yet they've discarded the Ministerial Code, reappointed someone who breached core professional standards and has now run away from basic accountability to this House. It is the same old Tory chaos and it is letting the country down. So I have questions for the Home Secretary that the government needs to answer. The Home Secretary accepted she sent an official document via her personal email to someone who was not authorised to see it. Is this the only time she has done this? Or has she shared other documents or other sensitive information? The Home Secretary is responsible for national security. So, has the Home Office, Cabinet Office or Security Service now undertaken an investigation into her security breaches to see how many others there have been? And can I urge him to make sure that happens urgently? What security clearance has the Home Secretary been given? Does she still have access to the most sensitive documents and information? And did the Cabinet Secretary warn against her reappointment? She has been Home Attorney General. She's been a minister on and off for 4 years, so she knows the rules about government documents, yet she sent one to her own private email to someone outside the government and also copied it by accident to someone else entirely. How is anyone supposed to believe she is such a novice that she didn't know exactly what she was doing? And if she really is that much of a novice, why on earth are the rest of us supposed to trust her with our national security? And it's been reported that she sent this as an error of judgment because she was was tired after going on an early morning raid. Well, is the Home Office supposed to just block her phone and her emails if she's been up half the night because she might do stupid things while she is tired? And there are suggestions that the Home Secretary was, while she was Attorney General, was investigated for a leak of information relating to the security service. Is that true? The Home Office, the Minister is a former policing minister. Does he think that if police officers breached their code of ethics and were sacked or forced to resign, they should then be reappointed to their jobs 6 days later because they said sorry? Or is it just one rule for the Cabinet and another for everyone else? Everyone knows this was a grubby deal to get a coronation to put party before country, but national security is too important for this.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made clear that this government will act with professionalism, integrity and accountability. That is exactly what this government will be doing. I cannot comment, Mr. Speaker, as the Right Honourable Lady will be aware, on what the Cabinet Secretary may or may not do. That is a matter for the Cabinet Secretary. On the speculation that she raised, I'm not going to comment on speculation. Either the Right Honourable Lady would not expect me to do so. At the end of the day, it's very simple. The Home Secretary made a mistake. She's acknowledged that she made a mistake. She offered her resignation and she stood down. The Prime Minister has looked again and the Prime Minister has decided, as is his decision, that she can return to government. I believe in redemption. I hope the Right Honourable Lady can as well. And she is busy today, as she will be, doing the job of the Home Secretary, keeping our border secure, helping the police to do their job. And I'm sure the Right Honourable Lady welcomes, as I do, the fact that we have now over 15,000 additional police officers delivering day in, day out for the country. That is what you can rely upon this government to do.
Sir Bernard.
Can I remind my Right Honourable friend that I recall that Tony Blair had to remove one of his very senior and trusted ministers for a breach of the ministerial code and later reappointed him to the government. I think what the public will respect is the fact that we have a system that holds ministers accountable for breaches of the code, but that there is learning from mistakes and not just blame. And I can vouch for the...
I'm going to leave that urgent question. That was an urgent question put down by Yvette Cooper of Labour to the new Home Secretary, and the details surrounding her appointment, Suella Braverman. She didn't attend. She is not forced to. She sent Jeremy Quinn from the Cabinet Office.
Just to remind you the background to this, if you're a bit confused about why this is being seen as so important, this relates back to Suella Braverman when she was in office previously, in terms of last week, sending an official document, it's alleged, to a fellow member of the party, Sir John Hayes, which was a technical infringement because she sent it via a personal email. Now, this has developed further with Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, alleging that there may have been actually a breach of national security as a result of that, and basically asking what the Cabinet Office, responsible for looking into these affairs, had done. Was there actually an inquiry launched? What had they found out?
And more news has come today. Of course, we've got the new Prime Minister. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, stays on, but they have decided to move what was called the fiscal statement. That was due on Monday. That date was set by Kwasi Kwarteng, I believe. Yes.
Remember him?
Yeah. Things move quickly at the moment. That will be a full budget now, and it will take place on the 17th of November. And
do the numbers stack up? Here to tell us whether, in fact, this is a sensible move or not, Liam, because you were suggesting when you spoke to us last that they may have to move it, maybe a few days. They've actually shunted it quite away now.
They don't have to move it. I said that they should. And the reason they should is to show the markets that they are back in control and that the elected government, we can talk about the word elected, run this country and not, what we used to call back in the 70s and 80s, the gnomes of Zurich, sort of faceless people, investors in financial markets spread across the globe. What's happened, and it's happened for lots of reasons, not just because of Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister and keeping Jeremy Hunt on as Chancellor and so on. But what has happened since the weekend is that government borrowing costs have fallen. They're still elevated compared to the beginning of the year, but they've fallen from about 4.1% to about 3.6%, a whole half of a percentage point. Enormous move. That's because all kinds of things going on in America, house price growth slowing down, and also the energy price cap not looking quite as expensive as I was saying on the breakfast show this morning, because gas prices are coming down and so on. But also because there is now a little bit more political stability in the UK, or a bit less instability. And that lowering of those government borrowing costs, what we call the 10-year gilt yield, which we all know about now, that will ripple out across the mortgage market and the personal loan market. So my advice, if you're about to remortgage or about to get a new mortgage for the first time, a big step for any family, wait, because it seems as if borrowing costs are now starting to fall.
How long for?
Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be working in television, would I?
Which my daughter's about to do, trying to fix the mortgage. However, let's talk about the significance of this in the bigger picture, because we've talked about this black hole in the economy. That was estimated to be 40 billion. That may have actually come down to 30 billion as a result of this change in that figure that you saw, 3.65%. Now, that means they've obviously got more wriggle room for that budget on November the 17th.
I'm always very sceptical of static snapshot holes in the national accounts, because it depends on so many variables. It depends on the growth rate, and it depends on the government borrowing cost, Mark, as you rightly say. When the government's spending 50, 60, 80, 100 billion quid a year on debt interest, if the cost of borrowing comes down, then of course that debt interest bill falls. If they can get growth going, that hole in the fiscal account falls. But above all, the really big enchilada, as we say, is that the energy price cap, if gas prices keep falling, and they're down from 350 euros per megawatt hour back in August to under 100 euros per megawatt hour. They've come down below that yesterday for the first time since before the war in Ukraine. That will mean they spend a lot less money on subsidising energy bills, and that will transform the government finances.
But just very quickly, because obviously we want to sort of give an accurate picture. Before that 3rd of November, we've got the Bank of England looking at the base rate. That may still be going up despite the government debt figures coming down.
But the Bank of England is very much on catch-up here. There's still a big gap between the Bank of England base rate, which is 2.25%, and where government borrowing costs are, which I've just said they've just come down from 4.1 to 3.6%. At times like this, it isn't the Bank of England which really drives borrowing costs. It's the money markets. Now, if the Bank of England, they may feel if there's a sense that inflation is coming down, they may not have to do a really big chunky 3/4 point rise. They might do a half-point rise, even a quarter-point rise. Sterling isn't under as much pressure as it was. The fiscal landscape is changing as the economy shifts.
We're going to talk to you some more, but I just want to show our listeners and viewers a clip from the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who spoke to broadcasters earlier this morning. Let's have a listen.
Our number one priority is economic stability and restoring confidence that the United Kingdom is a country that pays its way. And for that reason, the medium-term fiscal plan is extremely important, and I want to confirm that it will demonstrate debt falling over the medium term, which is very important for people to understand. But it's also extremely important that that statement is based on the most accurate possible economic forecasts and forecasts of public finances. And for that reason, the Prime Minister and I have decided that it is prudent to make that statement on the 17th of November, when it will be upgraded to a full autumn statement. And I've discussed this last night with the Governor of the Bank of England. He understands the reasons for doing that, and I'll continue to work very closely with him. The best way to ensure that the decisions that we take, these very, very difficult decisions, are ones that stand the test of time and give us the best chance of giving people security over their mortgages, over their jobs, over the cost of living concerns that everyone has. I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Well, she apologised for her mistakes. She has been fully accountable for those mistakes. She stepped down as Home Secretary. But from the point of view of people at home who want stability in the economy, they also need to see a united Conservative Party, and that's why the Prime Minister has put together a cabinet of all talents.
Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor and a member of this new government, as are many others, with Rishi Sunak appointing the cabinet yesterday. Some new boys and girls, some old boys and girls returning.
Including the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who was controversially reappointed after being forced to resign just days ago.
Well, as we're saying, Jeremy Hunt taking over from Kwasi Kwarteng to try and calm the markets, which he seems to have done so far, remaining in post.
And Foreign Secretary James Cleverly also retains his position.
But some big names returning to the cabinet. Dominic Raab back as Justice Secretary.
Michael Gove as Levelling Up Secretary.
And, of course, they'll all want to know what their departmental spending is, with different pressures now on the Chancellor and, indeed, the Prime Minister. Let's head back to Liam for his assessment, because clearly...
Liam, so just looking at those faces there and who's been appointed, let's see if they give an indication about what might happen on the 17th of November. Suella Braverman is on record, she put it in her resignation letter last week, as it happens, that immigration should not be relaxed to boost economic growth. So that might tell us something about immigration. Mel Stride, he was chair of the Treasury Select Committee. He's now Work and Pension Secretary. He was on record before he joined the government as saying benefits should rise in line with inflation. We also see the return of Andrew Mitchell, very passionate about international development, believing that this country should spend its fair share.
0.7% of GDP on,
exactly,
on,
that's
on overseas
that's
aid.
a UN, a United
which
Nations
we've
target.
actually retreated from.
Exactly. And so what sort of clues is yesterday's shuffle, because it wasn't a reshuffle, I suppose, shuffle tell us about the economic policy of this government?
Well, the first thing we should say, Gloria, and I say this looking directly at you and with affection, is that we're talking about politicians, so they're pretty light on their feet when they need to change their minds, and you could see you grinning at that. Let's never forget that this Chancellor who's there to calm the markets, he was the guy that when he stood as Tory leader, he wanted the rate of corporation tax cut to 15% from 19%. So, politicians at the top of the game are nothing if not pragmatic. But you're completely right. What your analysis shows, rightly in my view, is that they're, for all the sort of warm, fuzzy feeling we've got now, me talking about all the dollars going, the dollar's weaker and the pound's getting stronger and borrowing costs are coming down, deadly serious. That's really, really good stuff. But think of the decisions that they face. If Mel Stride, as the new Work and Pension Secretary, gets his way and we uprate the basic state pension, just the basic rate state pension, just a slither, well, a big chunk, but not all by any means of the welfare budget, that's £11 billion a year right there. That's absolutely huge. If Andrew Mitchell gets his way and foreign aid goes up to 0.7% of GDP, that's, billions of pounds. If Ben Wallace, the highly respected Defence Secretary, who's been playing a very shrewd game, he wants defence spending to go up by 50%. Because he wants it to go from 2% of GDP to 3% of GDP. So, and across the board, and then something that I really think we need to highlight here on GB News, because it's going to be big news, that public sector pay round. I think a lot of the public sector unions, they are going to test this Chancellor, they are going to test this Prime Minister, they're going to be looking for pay rises in line with the rate of inflation, particularly if pensioners are getting their benefits uprated by the rate of inflation. So that's a 10% pay rise across the public sector. That's double-digit billions of pounds, and I think it's going to get quite nasty and personal. I think a lot of the unions are going to go after the fact that we've got a very wealthy man in both number 10 and in a number 11 Downing Street, and we'll see then if this cabinet unity is maintained.
Since you mention, actually, his wealth, Keir Starmer there at Prime Minister's Question Times, he raised non-dom status. Just explain what it means. It's bandied around a bit, but none of us really understand.
What it stands for is non-domicile, and in tax terms, your domicile is very different from your residence. So you can be resident in the UK, but you can be domiciled in another country if you have a very clear blood link with that country, and if it's the country to which you will ultimately return. That's the kind of the philosophical description of it. And of course, Rishi Sunak's wife was non-dom in the UK. That doesn't mean she doesn't pay the tax that's due in the UK. It doesn't mean that she broke any laws. On the contrary, she paid all tax at all times that was due in the UK. But if you're non-dom, it means you can earn income around the world and not pay tax in the UK. So you can arrange your affairs that you pay very little tax in your UK. If you don't have a job in the UK, you don't declare income in the UK, and all your money is being paid in dividends in other jurisdictions. We know, because the Chancellor, as he then was, admitted it, that his wife had that status. So he and his wife, of course, is the daughter of a very wealthy Indian businessman worth hundreds of millions of pounds, that she has changed those affairs. But I think we can see from today this idea that the Prime Minister of the UK is incredibly wealthy and out of touch with ordinary people, fairly unfairly, is going to be a recurring theme.
Liam, as ever, thank you. More number crunching, more politics to come, but let's get an update on the weather now.
Hello, rather changeable weather for most of us over the next few days and, in fact, into the weekend as well. Windy conditions, but very mild for the time of year, with a mixture for the rest of today of sunshine and showers. And the reason for the unsettled weather is this area of low pressure, which swept a cold front across the country earlier on this morning. That's now clearing away to the north and east, leaving in its wake a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers could well be on the heavy side, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, particularly likely for northern and western parts of the UK. Elsewhere, there will be a good amount of sunshine with a little bit of patchy cloud coming and going. But look at those temperatures, well above average for this time of year, mid to high teens, and we could just touch the low 20s given a little bit of prolonged sunshine. Now, through this evening, conditions remain fairly similar, a few lingering showers to begin with, but then it's all changed from the southwest as this area of showery rain pushes in, gradually edging northwards across the country through the early hours of a Thursday morning. Within this, there will be some heavy bursts. Again, the odd rumble of thunder is possible as it trundles its way northwards through the latter part of the night and into Thursday. Northern Ireland in particular could see some very heavy and prolonged rain for a time on Thursday, and again on Friday with more rain on the cards for western parts of the UK. But back to Thursday, quite a lot of cloud around, temperatures once again well above average despite the breezy conditions, mid to high teens and possibly again just about touching the low 20s. Thursday evening, that showery rain continues to push northwards across Scotland, clearing elsewhere, but leaving quite a lot of cloud in its wake. And I mentioned further rain in the west on Friday, but temperatures still remaining well above average for the time of year, with breezy conditions for most, and that remains into the weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and a very warm welcome to GB Newsday, with Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister, being cheered by his own backbenchers at his first PMQs, just a day after taking up the keys to number 10.
But it wasn't without controversy. The Prime Minister took some hostile questions on his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary just days after she was forced to quit.
Well, Labour put an urgent question to the Home Secretary too, but she'd already left the chamber.
We'll have all the analysis of that. Plus, we'll speak to the veteran human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell after he was arrested for protesting in Qatar and is now involved in a major spat with the Foreign Secretary. All that after your latest news.
Gloria, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak faced his first Prime Minister's questions today and came under fire from the opposition for reappointing Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Labour is calling for Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to investigate Ms Braverman after she reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned from her role. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer questioned the new Prime Minister's decision. He also accused Mr Sunak of putting the party before the country in a heated debate.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account.
Well, Mr Sunak defended the Home Secretary, pointing to his previous answer and opening remarks.
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
The Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be delivered next Monday, will be upgraded to an autumn statement. The Chancellor says it's important to reach the right decisions and that the new statement will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It will now be delivered on November the 17th.
I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer-term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
Earlier, the Prime Minister chaired his first cabinet meeting with his newly appointed team. A number of ministers have been given the same role, with Downing Street saying the cabinet reflects a unified party. Nearly a dozen of Liz Truss's top-tier ministers, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, left the cabinet following Mr Sunak's appointment. In other news, a parliamentary committee is warning a proposed bill dealing with the legacy of Northern Ireland's troubles risks widespread breaches of human rights law. Ministers are proposing a form of amnesty for the perpetrators of the Troubles crimes in exchange for cooperation with a new truth recovery body. The Joint Committee on Human Rights said the plans may not meet international standards on the duty to investigate deaths, but the government says the legislation as a whole complies with human rights laws. Around 7 in 10 NHS trusts are failing to meet their targets for cancer referrals. In England, the current maximum wait time for a hospital appointment for suspected cancer is 2 weeks. NHS England says 93% of patients should be seen within this time frame, but data shows this target is routinely not being met. People looking to earn extra money as the cost of living crisis bites are being urged to watch out for scammers. Recent figures from trade association UK Finance show that over £600 million were lost due to fraud in the first half of 2022. 1 in 6 people say the rising cost of living means they're more likely to respond to an unprompted approach from someone offering an investment opportunity or a loan. Climate activists have targeted 2 luxury car showrooms with spray paint this morning. Just Stop Oil protesters sprayed orange paint on Ferrari and Bentley dealers in central London. The Metropolitan Police say 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage in relation to the protest. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, back to Gloria and Mark.
So, new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak facing Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer at his first Prime Minister's questions, clashing over the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, abolishing non-dom status and funding for deprived areas.
And the Labour leader also challenged the Prime Minister to have a general election. Let's have a look and listen at the key exchanges.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election. There's a new Tory at the top, but as always with them, party first, country second. Yesterday, on the steps of Downing Street, he also admitted what the whole country knows. The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess. I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot, but those with the broadest shoulders must step up. Does he agree?
No. Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman talked about party first and country second. Perhaps he could explain to us why it was a few years ago he was supporting the member for Islington North. Mr. Speaker, my record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable. That is the values of our compassionate party. We did it in COVID and we will do that again.
In public, he claims he wants to level up the North, but then he boasts about trying to funnel vital investment away from deprived areas. He says one thing and does another. But they're shouting. They're not my words. They're not my words. They're the words of the former chair of the Tory party, sacked yesterday for telling the truth about the Prime Minister. Even his own side know he's not on the side of working people. That's why the only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. So why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about mandates, about votes, about elections. It's a bit rich coming from the person who tried to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our country's history. Our mandate is based on a manifesto that we were elected on to remind him an election that we won and they lost. A mandate that says we want a stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders and levelling up. That is the mandate that I and this government will deliver for the British people.
So, spirited scenes in the Commons and Prime Minister's questions. Let's get the views of our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who was watching and listening to that. Darren, it seems that the Tory backbenchers have found their voice once again.
Yeah, they were pretty happy with the performance of Rishi Sunak. I think there is no doubt he put in a pretty good first showing, certainly in comparison to his predecessor, though, frankly, given Liz Truss's performance at dispatch boxes and even her ability to communicate, it was a pretty low bar to jump over, but he did manage to do so. I think it is a reminder, actually, we're going to see quite competitive exchanges between Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak in the weeks and months to come at PMQs in Parliament. Must be said, Keir Starmer had his own quick-witted lines. I did particularly like this one, that he only ran, this of Rishi Sunak, he only ran in a competitive election. He got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. That was quite witty. I think, you know, there's a criticism of Rishi Sunak that he didn't necessarily answer all the questions, particularly ones on Suella Braverman. We'll come on to that in a second. And it was a bit like the good old hits of Conservative leaders of the past, whether that was on Jeremy Corbyn or indeed Brexit and the referendum, but it was still very effectively done, and I would suggest it was potentially a score draw in the end between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. Now, let's move on to the news of today, because as always with new governments, there is constant news. First of all, on Suella Braverman, we know Labour are calling for an investigation into all of this. There are reports today that Sir Simon Case, who is the Cabinet Secretary, essentially had briefed the Prime Minister that it wasn't necessarily a terribly good idea for Suella Braverman to take over this post of Home Secretary, given the fact that she seems to have broken the ministerial code last week. She made a mistake, certainly for one she had to apologise for. Now, the Prime Minister made it clear that he felt that she'd made a mistake, but everyone deserves a second chance, and that she's a very capable minister and should be back in that post. I've just come from a briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesperson where it wasn't terribly clear whether they were denying that Sir Simon Case or indeed other officials had essentially said it was a bad idea to reappoint Suella Braverman. This is a story that is essentially Mark going to run and run and run. Labour clearly think they're making hay of it. Yvette Cooper, immediately after PMQs, was asking questions of the government about whether there would be further investigations or indeed whether we'd find out if an investigation has been carried out. In addition to that, the government have also confirmed in the last couple of minutes that the moratorium on fracking, i.e. that fracking essentially is put on the back burner, is now back in place. Liz Truss had a big vote last week in which she tried to overturn that. In fact, the vote also brought about the downfall of her premiership, but they are reverting back to the 2019 manifesto and the position of Boris Johnson that the fracking for shale gas is essentially now on the back burner. And also the Bloomberg in the last couple of minutes are reporting that the government currently have a £35 billion black hole in the public finances following that mini budget and the chaos that followed, and that they have identified 104 potential cost-saving measures going forward. Now, that figure, interestingly, of 35 billion is actually lower than it was just a couple of days and weeks ago, and I think it is one of the reasons that they decided to push back this fiscal statement, that our autumn statement, to November, in the hope that the stability in the markets will mean that ultimately that figure may drop somewhat further. So we've got announcements on fracking, we've got ideas about that fiscal statement which has now been delayed to November 17th, and we've got those continued questions about Suella Braverman, which will continue, I think, over the next hours and days, and we get a bit more information on what precisely happened in Downing Street yesterday, because you may remember there was a big gap between the appointment of Dominic Raab and the Foreign Sec as Deputy Prime Minister, James Cleverly as Foreign Secretary, and Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. 30, 45 minutes or so, many people suggesting what was being said in Downing Street to lead to that delay.
And Darren, just to look at the first time these two men, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, have squared up against each other at Prime Minister's question time, at least, What did we learn about the attack lines that they are preparing to use against each other?
Well, so from Keir Starmer's point of view, it's perfectly clear, isn't it? I mean, there's going to be some very difficult policy announcements, public spending announcements in the weeks to come. Labour will hone on that, whether it's austerity 2.0, who's been affected, why is it not on the broader shoulders. We'll hear a lot more about windfall taxes or higher taxes on wealthier people rather than on middle and lower income earners. Non-dom status, that is clearly still a sore point for the Chancellor, given the controversy he and his family got involved in earlier on this year. There will be, again, pressure to close that tax. It's not a loophole, but essentially that tax arrangement that is in place. And additionally, we talked about this actually, Tom and I, before PMQs, about this video that surfaced during the summer, i.e. drawing money away from deprived parts of northern England to places in the south. Now, there's a little bit of suggestions about where this statement was made. Rishi Sunak would make the statement, and he did this repeatedly during the summer, that there are deprived parts of the country, not just in the north, but in many areas of the south, and that it's right that everyone gets a fair share of the cake. Though Labour would point out he was making that statement in Tunbridge Wells, and Tunbridge Wells is not known, the royal borough of Tunbridge Wells, the royal town of Tunbridge Wells is not known for being a deprived part of the United Kingdom. So that argument will be had as well. I think from Rishi Sunak and his attack lines, it will be his association with Jeremy Corbyn when he was in the shadow cabinet, and also his association with trying to thwart Brexit as someone who was trying to bring about a second referendum. As I say, in many ways, Gloria, it is the carousel of politics and political attack lines that frankly was used by both sides, whether Boris Johnson was in Downing Street, Liz Truss, or indeed now Rishi Sunak.
Darren, excellent analysis as ever from you. Thank you. Speak to you later.
Well, let's get back on that carousel, shall we? Because the date of the budget statement or the fiscal event, choose what you want, now back from Halloween to the 17th of November. And we're being told it's going to be a full autumn statement, with both Prime Minister and Chancellor hoping that the postponed date will provide more accurate economic forecasts for their longer-term plans and perhaps to address what is a looming recession.
This follows Rishi Sunak's decision to keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor during those cabinet changes which took place yesterday. The Chancellor's been speaking this morning. Here's what he had to say.
Number one priority is economic stability and restoring confidence that the United Kingdom is a country that pays its way. And for that reason, the medium-term fiscal plan is extremely important. And I want to confirm that it will demonstrate debt falling over the medium term, which is very important for people to understand. But it's also extremely important that that statement is based on the most accurate possible economic forecasts and forecasts of public finances. And for that reason, the Prime Minister and I have decided that it is prudent to make that statement on the 17th of November, when it will be upgraded to a full autumn statement. And I've discussed this last night with the Governor of the Bank of England. He understands the reasons for doing that, and I'll continue to work very closely with him.
So that was the Chancellor, and suggestions, of course, that things may be easing slightly on the markets. Let's get the views of our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. So, doing the dates and the numbers, suggestions that perhaps there's going to be a little more wriggle room for everyone if they wait a couple of weeks?
Yeah, if things continue as they have been literally over the last few days. But, you know, financial markets are very, very volatile. I talked in the last hour about the fact that the price of wholesale gas has fallen below 100 euros per megawatt hour on European wholesale markets, down from 350 euros per megawatt hour. That makes the government's energy price cap a lot cheaper. They don't have to spend so much money, if any money at all, subsidising our gas and electricity bills for that reason. Of course, a lot of our electricity is generated using gas, and where the gas price is tends to set the electricity price the way our energy markets are designed. At the same time, government borrowing costs are coming down. And I'd reiterate the fact that what the government is trying to do, it's making an argument, which it should have been making, you know, at the time of the mini-budget, which is that we need to get nearer to the end of the year, so we've got a bigger, fuller fiscal picture of what's actually happening. That would have been a very, very credible argument. And it's interesting, do you remember when Kwasi Kwarteng at the time of the Tory conference was saying, no, it's going to be the 23rd of November, it's going to be the 23rd of November, and then it was Halloween, and now it's the 17th of November. So all this, governments have fallen, basically, over the fact that a fiscal statement has been moved forward in the end by 1 week.
On the 17th of November, when he does do what is essentially a full budget, we're still going to see spending cuts or tax rises or both, correct?
The idea, by saying it's a full autumn statement, means it isn't just an update. There will be both sides of the government's balance sheet there. It may not be that it's broken down by department. It may just be the sort of envelope of total government spending, but it will certainly be a very, very closely guarded number. I suspect the emphasis on the day, at least the government will want the emphasis on the day to be on the revenue side of the balance sheet, because that's what financial markets really, really care about in the instance. Are we good for our borrowing?
Yeah.
And as long as they can show credibly that government debt is falling over the medium term, we are good for our borrowing. That crucially depends, Mark, on growth. So the government now will be having lots of, shall we say, discussions within departments, particularly at the Home Office, where we know Suella Braverman wants to get her arms around immigration, get those numbers down. On the other hand, we've seen this round before, if we have a bit more immigration, that will help businesses. That should mean more growth. So that is a major flashpoint.
Very quickly, just mention one other term that we've heard, doom loop. This is from Tony Dank at CBI. Hugh Pill, the chief economist of the Bank of England, has also spoken about this. And that is, if they tighten too much and too quickly, you get into this downward spiral, which is very difficult to pull out of.
Both gentlemen are obviously reading certain newspaper columnists. So what a doom loop is when you get a sort of self-reinforcing downward spiral. I coined the term because my point was, if the Bank of England don't raise interest rates or they're behind the curve, that means that the pound is then weaker. That makes our imports more expensive. You then get more inflation, and the pound falls even more. They have to ignore that. So even if there are good reasons to lower the extent to which interest rates have to go up when the Bank of England meets on the 3rd of November, I still do think we'll see interest rate rises, if only to keep a floor under where the pound is.
Right. Got it. Thank you very much.
On the show, Liam. Thank you. Coming up, the migrant crisis as 38,000 make illegal channel crossings this year. There are fears of serious disorder at a processing centre in Kent. First, it is your weather.
Hello, rather changeable weather for most of us over the next few days and, in fact, into the weekend as well. Windy conditions, but very mild for the time of year, with a mixture for the rest of today of sunshine and showers. And the reason for the unsettled weather is this area of low pressure, which swept a cold front across the country earlier on this morning. That's now clearing away to the north and east, leaving in its wake a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers could well be on the heavy side, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, particularly likely for northern and western parts of the UK. Elsewhere, there will be a good amount of sunshine with a little bit of patchy cloud coming and going. But look at those temperatures, well above average for this time of year, mid to high teens, and we could just touch the low 20s given a little bit of prolonged sunshine. Now, through this evening, conditions remain fairly similar, a few lingering showers to begin with, but then it's all changed from the southwest as this area of showery rain pushes in, gradually edging northwards across the country through the early hours of a Thursday morning. Within this, there will be some heavy bursts. Again, the odd rumble of thunder is possible as it trundles its way northwards through the latter part of the night and into Thursday. Northern Ireland in particular could see some very heavy and prolonged rain for a time on Thursday, and again on Friday with more rain on the cards for western parts of the UK. But back to Thursday, quite a lot of cloud around. Temperatures once again well above average despite the breezy conditions, mid to high teens and possibly again just about touching the low 20s. Thursday evening, that showery rain continues to push northwards across Scotland, clearing elsewhere, but leaving quite a lot of cloud in its wake. And I mentioned further rain in the west on Friday, but temperatures still remaining well above average for the time of year, with breezy conditions for most, and that remains into the weekend.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
And welcome back to GB Newsday. Now, as Suella Braverman resumes her role in charge at the Home Office, despite the continuing controversy over her position, the Home Secretary's top priority may be that growing small boats crisis.
With 38,000 people having arrived so far this year, GB News can reveal authorities are now deeply concerned about the potential for serious disorder at their migrant processing centre in Kent. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is there. Mark, what is leading to the claims, the fears about serious disorder?
Well, overcrowding here and a change in the demographics of those being held in this temporary processing centre. I should say this processing centre at Manston Air Base in Kent is the main processing centre where all those arriving on small boats across the channel are taken. They're supposed to be here for 2 or 3 days at most, before then being farmed out to interim accommodation, hotels, maybe then into council houses and alike. But what's happening is the 1,500 capacity has been doubled. There are 3,000 people here, and many of the people that are here are staying here for weeks, some as long as a month, in conditions that are just not suited towards it, also being guarded by staff who are just not fully trained in taking those security duties on. There has been an increase in violence and tensions. We've been told that on Monday night alone there were 7 separate security incidents here, and there is real concern that it may only be a matter of time before we have a very serious outbreak of disorder at Manston Air Base. Now, these concerns that we've been told about have been backed up by the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders, who was addressing MPs at a session of the Home Affairs Select Committee this morning.
Of the order of nearly 2,500 people who were being guarded by non-trained detainee custody officers. So they're being guarded by a mixture of immigration enforcement officers and security guards. It was sufficiently alarming when I discovered that. I was frankly speechless.
Yeah. And there is no doubt that the concern about the change in the demographics is, according to those we've talked to a key driver of much of the increase in tensions. Of the 38,000 people who've arrived across the channel so far this year. 12,000 are Albanians, and in fact at the moment the majority of people arriving are Albanians. Now, few if any of those coming from this country that's not involved in any kind of conflict, that is a NATO member aspiring to join the EU, few if any would ever qualify for asylum, and actually the vast majority don't want asylum according to the authorities. They are disappearing off as soon as they're put into temporary accommodation like a hotel. 2 or 3 days later they're disappearing off to work in the illegal economy, or even more worryingly, to work for organised criminal gangs.
And Mark, this has only been open, I think, since January. What are physical conditions like? Because there was a report that they'd even had an outbreak of diphtheria there.
That is just one of the diseases that they're dealing with, a gambit of diseases that the staff have to be on guard for, but they are on a regular basis finding those who are being held here coming down with various diseases, and of course add to that the tension of housing double the number that this processing centre was designed for. And as I say, it was only designed to hold them for a few days while they're processed and then farmed out to their interim accommodation. But actually, because the numbers crossing the channel, okay, not the last few days because of weather conditions, but regularly the numbers crossing the channel are in the high hundreds. Now, what the Chief Inspector of Borders says, that on average they are managing to process and release about 130 odd people to this interim accommodation on a daily basis. Well, if you weigh that up against some days when we're getting more than 1,000 people crossing the channel, you can see where the problem lies.
Mark, thanks very much for updating us there at Manston down in Thanet, Kent. Thank you very much indeed.
Just some breaking news for you. The Prime Minister's press secretary has been speaking to journalists. It's something that normally happens after Prime Minister's question time. They have what's known as a huddle. Rishi Sunak is not committing to the triple lock on state pensions. The Prime Minister's press secretary said this is something that is going to be wrapped up into the fiscal statement. We wouldn't comment ahead of any fiscal statements or budgets, but what I can say is he has shown through his record as Chancellor is that he will do what's right and compassionate for the most vulnerable. Yeah. So perhaps those wealthier pensioners may not be getting a double-digit rise.
Just to remind you that fiscal statement due on the 17th of November, and the triple lock basically says that the state pension would rise by either the rate of inflation, the prices index, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest, and that inflation figure is based on the September figure, 10.1%. So the government was facing perhaps an increase in the state pension of 10.1% for next April. That looks as if it may now be in question. We'll learn more on the 17th of November.
The time is 1:32. It's time for your news update.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has come under fire for his reappointment of the Home Secretary as he faced his first Prime Minister's questions today. Labour is calling for Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to investigate Suella Braverman after she reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned from her role. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer questioned the new Prime Minister's decision to reappoint Ms Braverman. He also accused the Prime Minister of putting the party before the country in a heated debate.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account.
Mrs Sunak had already defended the Home Secretary in his opening remarks.
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
The Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be delivered next Monday, will be upgraded to an autumn statement. The Chancellor says it's important to reach the right decisions and that the new statement will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It will now be delivered on November the 17th.
I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer-term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
And in other news, climate activists have targeted 2 luxury car showrooms with spray paint. Just Stop Oil protesters sprayed orange paint on Ferrari and Bentley dealers in central London this morning. The Metropolitan Police say 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is already embroiled in a row over his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, just days after she was forced to resign over a breach of the ministerial code.
Yeah, questions being asked by Yvette Cooper, the shadow Home Secretary, about what was known and indeed whether Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, warned against a reappointment. Well, let's join our South of England reporter, Jeff Moody, who's down in Fareham, which is Suella Braverman's constituency, no less. Jeff, what are they saying down there?
It is indeed. Well, as you can imagine, they're saying all sorts of things, very mixed feelings. Some people saying to me, look, it's right that she's come back. She made a mistake. She was honest about it. She admitted it. They say she's been a very good local MP. She's done a lot for her constituents. Others saying to me she shouldn't come back. She's done nothing for the constituents here at all. People saying that to me in quite colourful language too. But where there is a consensus is a level of concern about this ministerial misconduct from 6 days ago. A lot of people believing that there's more to it than meets the eye. But in particular, people are concerned with the idea of her resignation letter, how influential that was in the toppling of Liz Truss. So we now have a situation where the Home Secretary was influential in toppling the previous Prime Minister, and the current Prime Minister, when he resigned back in the summer as Chancellor, was influential in toppling the Prime Minister before that, Boris Johnson. So people saying here, can you trust these people in these top jobs when it looks like their own ambition has been influential in toppling other people? People have been talking about a coup and saying the coup is now complete. Let's have a look at what people have been saying here.
Well, I think she's a scheming cow because she's obviously plotted all these moves. She was obviously parachuted in this constituency because she showed promise, and she's never been a good constituency MP.
Mixed feelings at the minute.
Well, I think it's fine. She's done the job for a little while, so it's not a new person coming in again. Yeah, so I'm happy with it.
This is the bit that does concern me a little bit. If it's security, then she should actually stand up and admit it properly. And she's been given a second chance. We shall just see how she gets on.
I think it was a bit of a mistake in the first place. It seemed a very petty thing to get sacked over, to be honest. But personally, I think she's very good for Fareham. She's done a lot in the past, and I'm sure she'll do a lot again in the future.
And then, of course, there's the issue of immigration. This policy of sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda, controversial here in Fareham, just as it is everywhere else across the country. Some people saying, well, look, it's the right thing to do. Something has to be done for their own sakes as much as for anybody else. We can't have this situation continuing. Other people saying to me, well, look, here we are in a situation where we have a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary, both of whom are from ethnic minority backgrounds. Great, we can have a conversation about immigration without people throwing the card of you're being racist around. So on the topic of immigration, mixed views here, every view imaginable. But where the consensus lies is that this is muddying the water. This is preventing Rishi Sunak from having a bounce because there is all of this controversy around this appointment so early on in his tenure as Prime Minister.
Jeff, thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's just actually bring you a bit more breaking news we're getting from this lobby briefing in Downing Street. We're telling you about the triple lock and state pension. We're now learning Downing Street saying it's not committing to increasing defence spending to 3% of GDP by 2030. That was clearly something that Ben Wallace, as Defence Secretary, had wanted. But the Prime Minister's official spokesman saying that's something that will need to set out the fiscal or future fiscal event, November the 17th. It will be no decisions made on significant spending, as is custom ahead of any fiscal event, but confirming that the energy bill support will continue through the winter as previously set out. That's just coming through from Downing Street.
Now, yesterday we heard how human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell had been arrested in Qatar. He was staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in the country.
Well, he was actually seen standing outside the National Museum in Doha wearing this T-shirt saying that Qatar was anti-gay. Obviously a criminal act to be gay in Qatar still, and it's hosting the World Cup in a few weeks' time, causing some controversy because of its human rights record.
And now, James, cleverly, the Foreign Secretary has urged football fans to show a little bit of flex and compromise and to respect the culture of the host nation. This has obviously upset a lot of the LGBT plus community.
Well, let's speak to the man himself. Peter Tatchell now joins us. Thank you very much indeed for joining with your T-shirt. We should add. You're back home safely, but what actually happened to you?
Well, I staged a protest for LGBT plus rights outside the National Museum of Qatar in the capital city, Doha. Then, after about 35 minutes, it took quite a while, state security officials and police arrived. I was put in detention. I wasn't locked up or anything, but I was held on the curbside and not allowed to leave. My placard was confiscated. And then they spotted that my colleague, Simon Harris from the Peter Tatchell Foundation, was taking photos and immediately ran over and grabbed his phone, took him into custody, and then deleted all the images and videos that he'd taken. Fortunately, he'd managed to upload some already, so some did get out. We were then both subjected to about 49 minutes of interrogation about what we were doing, who put us up to it, and so on. And then eventually, much to my surprise, we were released, but told that it was in our interest to go to Qatar airport and leave the country, which is what we did. And I'm now speaking to you from Sydney.
OK, Peter, I just want to read out the full quote from Mr Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, which has caused so much controversy. But if you see the full quote, maybe there is something in there to assuage you. He said, I have spoken to the Qatari authorities in the past about gay football fans going to watch the World Cup and how they will treat our fans and international fans. They want to make sure that football fans are safe, secure and enjoy themselves. And they know that means they're going to have to make some compromises in terms of what is an Islamic country with a very different set of cultural norms to our own. So the Foreign Secretary said he has raised the issue about gay football fans needing to be able to attend the World Cup and have a good time while they do so. Are you reassured?
But he's also said that the fans must respect the host nation. Well, how can anyone with any conscience respect the dictatorship? Because that is what Qatar is. It's a police state. There's no right to protest, no freedom of expression. This is one of the worst tyrannies. And people who protest normally are locked up and jailed. The only reason I got away with it was because I had a British passport, I had the intervention of the British consulate staff, and, of course, Qatar does not want any bad adverse publicity in the run-up to the World Cup. If I'd done this protest after the World Cup, when the international media had disappeared, I think the outcome might have been quite different. And, of course, for Qatari people, they are at much greater risk. In fact, the Qatari woman walked past me and saw my placard and advised me, put that away, go away, they'll come and they'll arrest you and they'll put you in prison. So that's the view of ordinary Qataris. They don't have those freedoms. And I think it's absolutely shameful that James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, wants us to respect that regime. And he's focusing on getting the fans to respect the regime, not on the regime's grotesque human rights abuses against LGBT plus people, particularly against women and migrant workers.
Now, Keir Starmer says he will not be attending the World Cup, not a protest as such, but he's declined to obviously add his name to those travelling to the football. What would you say to those football fans who may decide that they want to go anyway and that their voice should be heard? I mean, how much trouble could they be in?
Well, in contrast to Keir Starmer, James Cleverly is saying that he is going to the World Cup. And that is collusion with tyranny. It's exactly what the Qatar regime wants. They want our politicians to go there, particularly our foreign secretary.
Yeah, but what I was trying to get at, sorry, Peter, to interrupt, but what I should get, if a gay football fan decides to go, should they still go and make their point when they're there, or is it just too dangerous for that?
Well, there's a number of issues. First of all, I think all fans should boycott the World Cup because it's giving kudos and credibility to the regime.
Right.
But if they go, yes, make some kind of symbolic statement, sure. But the most important thing is it's very difficult for fans to get tickets or hotels or transport or air tickets. So the best thing people can do who can't go is to use their social media platforms to shine a light on the human rights abuses in Qatar. That's what we need. We don't need giving that regime the PR victory that they want. They want our politicians and fans to go there, and they will claim that's an endorsement of their regime.
Thank you, Peter Tatchell. Thanks for your time. Now, hundreds of dock workers at the Port of Liverpool have begun another round of strike action in a dispute over pay.
The staff also walked out back in September when no agreement was made at that time.
Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has this story from the picket line.
One of the busiest container ports in Northern Europe, brought to a standstill by the latest round of dock strikes. Workers at the Port of Liverpool have come together to demand a wage increase in line with the rise in inflation, but so far a deal is yet to be struck.
This is a profitable company, and we believe, like other workers in the country, we're facing the cost of living crisis like everybody else, and we want a fair deal for our members.
The Port of Liverpool is run and operated by Peel Ports, who last week reported they had offered their workers an 11% pay rise. That would be the highest percentage increase of any port group in the UK.
Peel Ports' press statement is a complete misrepresentation of the deal that was put to us. There are 3 groups on strike here. 2 of them have been offered 9%. The other group that Peel claim is 11% offer is actually 9.2% and a one-off payment.
What would it take for the workers to go back to work?
Well, I believe if Peel Ports made an offer of 11% like the claiming they have, I think that would be the basis of an acceptable deal.
There are, of course, 2 sides to every story, and strikes are now going to continue here at the Port of Liverpool for the next 2 weeks. That's unless Peel Ports will offer the dock workers a rise in pay that they deem to be acceptable.
In a statement, Peel Ports have said the latest 2-week strike will cause yet further damage to our customers, the business and the Liverpool City region, threatening even more jobs at the port. It's wholly irresponsible of Unite to prolong this self-defeating strike. And so, for now at least, it seems negotiations at the Port of Liverpool remain as unmoved as the shipping containers, with its workers prepared to be on strike for the long haul. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
And of course, we'll update you the situation there up in Liverpool, as we will with all the other industrial unrest that seems to be gathering across the country. But let's get back to the Prime Minister's inbox. Rishi Sunak also facing cross-party calls now to rethink the controversial move to rip up, as they say, parts of the post-Brexit deal on Northern Ireland, with warnings that it breaks international law and could risk a trade war with the EU.
The government is facing demands for further details on the impact of the draft legislation before it continued its parliamentary passage through the House of Lords, where it's facing opposition.
So, what could the future of the protocol be under Rishi Sunak? Let's speak to Northern Ireland-based journalist Amanda Ferguson joining us. Amanda, no word as yet, even though we've got a lobby briefing going on about the future of this, which is really at the centre of relations with the EU particularly.
Well, we don't know what the new Prime Minister thinks about a lot of issues that are related to Northern Ireland, because he hasn't really had to be tested on those in the past. We know that the issues that there are surrounding the protocol remain a barrier to power sharing being restored in Northern Ireland. And indeed, the reappointed Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, has indicated that he'll call a fresh election if Stormont isn't restored by 1 minute past midnight on Friday. So we're in a period of turbulence at the moment, and unfortunately we're not sort of high up on the list of priorities for the Prime Minister that he's indicated so far. We know that Boris Johnson had talked about getting Brexit done and how he had got Brexit done, whereas some unionists in particular in Northern Ireland don't feel that the UK government has got Brexit done because of the different unique trading arrangements that apply to Northern Ireland.
Just explain those trading arrangements and why the protocol causes difficulty for some unionists in particular.
Well, obviously, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, but it is a unique part of the United Kingdom in that it's on a separate island and that it has a land border with the Republic of Ireland that remains an EU member state. So there was always going to have to be some sort of arrangement put in place, and the possibility of a hard land border just wouldn't particularly be countenanced. It was felt that any attempt to try and sort of police and check along hundreds of miles of border compared to checks that would take place at a handful of ports. They were the sort of options that were available. So unionists, political leaders in particular, are of the view that Northern Ireland doesn't have the Brexit that Scotland, England and Wales has, and that because trade flows easier across the island of Ireland, that it somehow diminishes Northern Ireland's place in the UK. Now, we know that the Good Friday Agreement is very clear about the constitutional position of Northern Ireland, that it remains part of the UK unless people would vote for something different. But certainly unionist political leaders view the protocol as something that damages not only they view it as Northern Ireland's economic place in the UK, but also its constitutional place. Now, non-unionist political leaders will point to the fact that there's always been special arrangements for Northern Ireland that take into consideration the unique position that we have across these islands, and that they would view the protocol as mitigating against the worst impacts of Brexit. But essentially the protocol means that Northern Ireland remains in the EU single market for goods. Now, some benefits of that are that some businesses benefit from having dual market access, whereas some businesses are not benefiting from that and are having a lot of disturbance. There is widespread agreement that everybody acknowledges that the protocol needs to be finessed and needs made work better. The problem that unionists have and the lead unionist party in Northern Ireland has is that it's using not re-entering the devolved government in Northern Ireland as leverage, or as it sees it in the protocol negotiations.
Yeah. Amanda, thank you very much indeed for that. And just to tell people that Sinn Féin's leader, Mary Lou McDonald's been speaking in the Dáil, saying that Sinn Féin had sought a meeting with Rishi Sunak as soon as possible. The protocol, she says, widely supported. It's working and, of course, can work better. So we want to see that happen sooner rather than later. Time is of the essence, she said.
And in case you're not aware of the news that broke this morning, the RMT union has confirmed it is cancelling its planned strike action on the 3rd of November after it was made aware that it conflicted with the Royal British Legion's Poppy Day. Workers will now strike on the 5th, 7th and 9th, so still 3 strike days, but not on the 3rd anymore.
So remembrance...
it's the collection. It's a really vital day for them
exactly. People will be able to travel and pay their respects. Good news. More coming up. Let's get an update on the weather.
Hello, the rest of this week and in fact into the weekend remains fairly changeable. A mixture of some sunny spells, some showers, perhaps longer spells of rain at times. It will though be exceptionally mild for the time of year despite the rather breezy conditions. Now we can see on the chart low pressure in charge, closely packed isobars indicating the strength of the wind and various weather fronts sweeping across the country at times over the coming few days. The first one cleared away nicely this morning, leaving in its wake a mixture of bright or sunny spells and a scattering of showers. Some of those showers have been on the heavy side, but we see some more persistent showery rain edging in from the southwest overnight tonight and into the early hours of Thursday morning. But despite the cloud and breeze, it will be another very mild night for this time of year. So for Thursday, rather a wet start across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England. That rain continues to trundle its way northwards as the day progresses on Thursday. Meanwhile, becoming drier behind that band of showery rain with some bright or sunny spells. And if we do get some prolonged sunshine, temperatures could just about nudge 20 Celsius. But even so, mid to high teens, quite exceptional for this time of year. Now through Thursday evening, that showery rain continues to move northwards across Scotland, and then the next band of rain pushes in from the west, bringing some quite heavy and persistent rain for a time across Northern Ireland, and that will eventually push into other western parts of the UK overnight Thursday and into Friday morning. Meanwhile, Thursday night, another very mild night underneath all that cloud. So Friday, quite a wet day, particularly across western parts, some heavy bursts of rain at times, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder. The far southeast tending to escape the rain, generally remaining dry here. Temperatures, though, remaining above average for the time of year right the way through the rest of the week and into the weekend.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he will rebuild public finances in a way that is fair and compassionate. In his first Prime Minister's questions, Mr Sunak promised to protect the most vulnerable as he addressed what he called mistakes of his predecessor Liz Truss. However, the heated debate was dominated by questions over his reappointment of the Home Secretary. Labour is calling for an investigation after Suella Braverman reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned from her role. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer questioned the new Prime Minister's decision.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account.
Mr Sunak had already defended the Home Secretary in his opening remarks.
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
The Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be delivered next Monday, will be upgraded to an autumn statement. The Chancellor says the new statement will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It'll now be delivered on November the 17th.
I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer-term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
To other news now. A parliamentary committee is warning a proposed bill dealing with the legacy of Northern Ireland's troubles risks widespread breaches of human rights law. Ministers are proposing a form of amnesty for the perpetrators of the Troubles crimes in exchange for cooperation with a new truth recovery body. The Joint Committee on Human Rights say the plans may not meet international standards on the duty to investigate deaths, but the government says the legislation as a whole complies with human rights laws. Around 7 in 10 NHS trusts are failing to meet their targets for cancer referrals. In England, the current maximum wait time for a hospital appointment for suspected cancer is 2 weeks. NHS England says 93% of patients should be seen within this time frame, but data shows this target is routinely not being met. Climate activists have targeted 2 luxury car showrooms with spray paint this morning. Just Stop oil protesters sprayed orange paint on Ferrari and Bentley dealers in central London. The Metropolitan Police say 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, back to Gloria and Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed, and a very warm welcome back to GB Newsday.
Rishi Sunak has come under fire at his first Prime Minister's questions over his controversial reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
Well, she'd been forced to resign, remember, from Liz Truss's government only last week over an alleged breach of security.
Also this hour, a row over the triple lock on pensions as the new Prime Minister fails to guarantee he'll keep it.
And fears of more unrest at a migrant centre in Kent after 38,000 people now make those illegal channel crossings.
And failures in NHS cancer care. 7 in 10 trusts are failing to meet their hospital targets.
So, Rishi Sunak facing Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer at his first PMQs today. The pair clashing over his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, also nom-dom status and even funding for deprived areas.
And in spirited exchanges, the Labour leader also challenged the Prime Minister to have a general election. Let's have a listen to the key exchanges.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election. There's a new Tory at the top, but as always with them, party first, country second. Yesterday, on the steps of Downing Street, he also admitted what the whole country knows. The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess. I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot, but those with the broadest shoulders must step up. Does he agree?
No. Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman talked about party first and country second. Perhaps he could explain to us why it was a few years ago he was supporting the member for Islington North. Mr. Speaker, my record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable. That is the values of our compassionate party. We did it in COVID and we will do that again.
In public, he claims he wants to level up the north, but then he boasts about trying to funnel vital investment away from deprived areas. He says one thing and does another. But they're shouting. They're not my words. They're not my words. They're the words of the former chair of the Tory party, sacked yesterday for telling the truth about the Prime Minister. Even his own side know he's not on the side of working people. That's why the only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. So why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about mandates, about votes, about elections. It's a bit rich coming from the person who tried to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our country's history. Our mandate is based on a manifesto that we were elected on to remind him an election that we won and they lost. A mandate that says we want a stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders and levelling up. That is the mandate that I and this government will deliver for the British people.
Let's speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, much cheering on the Tory backbenchers, but clearly the attack line from Labour is continuing. I'm just seeing that Sir Keir Starmer's spokesman saying that Labour is now pressing Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to offer what they call a substantive response to this issue about Suella Braverman.
Yeah, indeed. First of all, just on PMQs itself, yes, I think actually the banging and the cheering you hear there is almost through a sense of relief, if you like, Mark, that Rishi Sunak is at the dispatch box in the sense that clearly he is a much better performer than his predecessor, Liz Truss. Excuse me, got something caught in the back of my throat. And in those circumstances, sorry, I'm going to have to get a
come back to you in a moment, Darren. Give you a chance to have a cough.
It's trying to say those words, Liz Truss again, isn't it? I know, it's very difficult. But let's just remind you that the Prime Minister holding his first Cabinet meeting too this morning. Let's see some of the new faces in that Cabinet, some of the old faces too that have reappeared.
Including the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who was controversially reappointed after being forced to resign just days ago. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who took over from Kwasi Kwarteng in an attempt to calm markets, remains in post.
And those markets are calm at the moment as well. But, of course, we'll see what happens on November the 17th, the autumn statement now. James Cleverly reappointed as Foreign Secretary, holding his position despite coming out publicly in support for Boris Johnson, but now involved in a row over gay rights in Qatar for the World Cup.
Dominic Raab is Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. He had both of these roles when he served under Boris Johnson. He'd actually given them after he was replaced by Liz Truss as Foreign Secretary all the way back in September 2021 in one of Boris Johnson's last big reshuffles.
And Michael Gove is back and to the same job, Levelling Up Secretary, despite in August, in the middle of the Truss versus Sunak campaign, insisting he was retiring from frontline politics.
Can now speak to consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. I think it's fair to say that Rishi Sunak had a good start. Tory MPs were shouting more, and they sounded like they meant it. So PMQs is done, but where do the challenges now lie?
Well, I think that's the best spirit Tory backbenchers have been in for months and months, actually, because there was a cloud over Boris Johnson's leadership premiership for so long. And I think Sunak's quick on his feet, quicker than I remembered, actually. And I don't really think Keir Starmer landed a killer blow. But it's going to be interesting to see, isn't it, where they're going to go with this. Keir Starmer immediately talking about non-DOMs and the fact Labour want to get rid of the ability for people to be non-DOMs. Sunak's wife, of course, was a non-Dom. That was exposed, and she then decided to change her tax status and start paying tax in Britain on a worldwide earning. So they are definitely going to play this class war. Rishi Sunak's too rich. to understand the aspirations of ordinary people. But of course, he can remind people he's the son of a GP and the son of a pharmacist. They're not exactly captains of industry, not exactly high-powered and well-paid people in particular, who struggled to send their son to a private school, and he repaid them when he was earning big bucks in the city, because I think it put a big hole in their savings. But of course, the big challenge for him is the economy. It's going to be all about the economy. And I thought that's what Keir Starmer would have gone on today, rather than waffling on about whether he should or shouldn't have employed the Home Secretary, re-employed the Home Secretary.
And how damaging do you think those attacks could be, Andrew, bearing in mind that Yvette Cooper pressed it home as well? They're still wanting Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, to issue some kind of statement. Bearing in mind, of course, Rishi Sunak was talking about integrity, professionalism and accountability.
Look, she was fired over what was a technical breach. She released a letter on a private email account, which should have been on an encrypted account. But the real reason she was fired last week, I read about this in the Mail, was because she had a stand-up row with Liz Truss, which went on for the best part of 90 minutes over immigration. Liz Truss wanted to relax the immigration rules. The Home Secretary did not. They could not agree. And then I think Truss used as an excuse this minor technical breach over the letter to fire the Home Secretary. And I'm quite sure, actually, that the new Prime Minister will have consulted the Cabinet Secretary before he decided to bring her back into the Cabinet. And if the Cabinet Secretary raised reservations, he would have weighed those up and decided whether they were serious enough to bar her return. I think he'll have played this by the book. He has to. He's only been Prime Minister for 24 hours.
Andrew, I'm going to say something I'm not sure I've ever said before. I agree with you that Keir Starmer shouldn't have started Prime Minister's questions by talking about Suella Braverman. Will you agree with me, though, that when Yvette Cooper had that urgent question, she should have shown up?
Yeah, she should. Absolutely, she should.
Unity.
She's got a big new job to do in a big department, but she should have been there. She should have, in the same way that Liz Truss should have been there when there was that question about her last week. Because Suella Braverman, by the way, is very good on her feet. She can handle herself, and she'd have answered very well. But yes, she should have been in the chamber.
Well, on that note of agreement, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Maybe a sign of things to come for the moment. Thank you for joining us. Let's head back to Westminster, though, and speak to Darren once more. And hopefully the fly or the frog in the throat has disappeared. Darren, clearly the other issue is the pain to come, perhaps, on November the 17th. We had the lobby briefing after PMQs, indications perhaps that the pensions triple lock may not be there, defence spending may not be 3% of GDP, indications perhaps of the pain yet to come.
Yeah, indeed. This is the problem when you talk too much endlessly for days. You do tend to lose your voice from time to time. But it is back, I promise, after a glass of water. Just on PMQs and what Gloria and Andrew were just talking about there, what you guys in the studio were talking about, I think Labour's strategy in terms of the reason they brought up Suella Braverman, first of all, you know what, is it a bit of an own goal by Rishi Sunak? This is something that I think is going to run, not least of all because we are going to have to hear from Sir Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary. I think it is pretty clear that he did have reservations about the reappointment of Suella Braverman. For Keir Starmer's point of view, this is about hammering home that essentially Rishi Sunak is the same old Tory, he would argue, that he talks about integrity and transparency and accountability and kind of trustworthiness in the street of Downing Street. Well, when it comes to it, that he's done a deal behind the scenes because he needed to get elected, even if it wasn't necessarily good for the country. That is the argument, at least, he would make. But in the end, I think the Conservatives have got themselves, or Rishi's got himself, into a bit of a tricky situation on this. Overall, though, it is very clear that MPs, Conservative MPs, were relieved and pretty happy with his performance, though that is, of course, in contrast to his predecessor, and that bar was pretty low. In terms of the news today, we've got a hell of a lot of it, frankly, of where the government is at in terms of these big decisions it's going to have to make in the weeks and months to come. First of all, you're right, pushing back that autumn statement is quite significant until the November 17th on a Thursday rather than next Monday as been planned. The thought process again in government is that they need to get this right, i.e. having messed up the mini budget, they cannot afford to get it wrong again, and that means a bit more time. But second of all, they're hoping that actually the public finances, because the markets have stabilised a little bit, might actually give them a little bit more headroom headroom between now and then, which will be reflected in the OBR reports. And yes, this is the weird thing. I was at that press briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesperson. It happens every single day. And the word from the Prime Minister's spokesperson was that the Prime Minister is committed to the 2019 manifesto. Of course he has to be, considering he's not going to mandate of his own, apart from the fact that he is in the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party won the election. So that means fracking, for example. The moratorium has been dropped on that, i.e. we're not going to see fracking anytime soon, as had been promised in the 2019 manifesto, something Liz Truss, of course, tried to change. But then there's entire inconsistency on other things. So the triple lock on pensions is also in the 2019 manifesto, but the government were not committing themselves to putting that on the table. And we've had the hokey-cokey on something like the triple lock, where at one stage Liz Truss said it was guaranteed, then she said it wasn't, then at PMQs last week she said it was, and now Rishi Sunak saying, well, it is on the table again. So there is slight confusion between this line where they're saying, yes, we're going to stick by that 2019 manifesto, and at the same time, when it comes to actual details of policies in that manifesto, things seem a little unclear, if I'm being kind.
Well, you have been perfectly clear,
Yeah,
Darren,
loud
as
and
ever.
clear, loud and clear, indeed.
You need a drink to clear your throat.
Yeah.
Make sure it's definitely clear.
Go and join Kevin McQuire down the red line. He might still be there from yesterday. Anyway, let's just bring you a bit of reaction. The Liberal Democrats on this very issue accusing Rishi Sunak of, quote, an endless hokey-cokey over pensions and the triple lock. Well, let's just remind you, the triple lock actually ensures that the state pension must rise in line with inflation or by prices index or by 2.5%, whichever is the highest. But if Rishi Sunak is to turn back on Liz Truss's undertaking, it could mean tougher times ahead for many who are currently battling with the cost of living crisis.
Joining us now in the studio is economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Liam, he has said, his press secretary, when sort of outlining his position, did make clear that his record demonstrated that he'd always looked after those who are most in need. So effectively what we're talking about here, I think, is whether the richest pensioners should get a double-digit rise.
There's a bit to unpack here. So the triple lock, to be clear, is pensions go up either by the rate of inflation by 2.5% or by the extent to which average earnings are going up. And this is the issue for the Conservative Party. If the basic state pension in April did go up by, we use September's inflation rate, which is 10.1%, that immediately cost the government £11 billion a year forever. So that's a huge amount of money. I think the argument in the Conservative Party, even though it's part of the 2019 manifesto, as Darren said, to observe that triple lock, the argument in the Conservative Party is that an awful lot of people who are earning, families struggling to make ends meet, won't get anywhere near a 10% pay rise. They may get no pay rise at all. And as you alluded to, Gloria, that basic state pension is what's called a universal benefit. It's for everybody, and a lot of pensioners won't need that, frankly. But that doesn't mean we haven't got pensioner poverty in the UK. Of course we've got pensioner poverty in the UK, and it may be, just as with, I suspect, the energy price cap, if it's needed after April, it becomes more targeted. I think help for vulnerable older people, pensioners, people in later life will also be more targeted. So the basic state pension isn't uprated by inflation. Instead, there are pensioner credits, there are benefits for older people, disability living allowance, heating allowances, and so on. So the taxpayer gets more bang for their buck.
Politically very sensitive, of course.
Yeah,
because
11 million pensioners, and they often vote.
Well, this is the thing, the silver vote. Yeah. And, of course, they will point out, hold on, this is a universal benefit, and it's still actually below the rate that you get in many other European
and it's in the
countries.
manifesto, which you keep telling us is your mandate, Mr Sunak.
Could they do the same with benefits in terms of means testing more in terms of actually whether they go up with inflation? I.e., you may get inflation increases for some benefits, but not for others.
Well,
and they try and
on those benefits,
divvy it
aren't
up.
they? But those benefits, if you're being topped up because your wage isn't high enough, you don't have the problem of some rich people benefiting from those benefits.
Targeting, this is a discussion that goes back to Beveridge. So during that famous report written by a Liberal, commissioned by a Conservative, implemented by a Labour government. Steady. It's one of those moments where British politics really came together to create basically the world's first universal welfare state. We still are haunted by the Beveridge report in the sense that he laid out brilliantly the philosophical difficulties between spending money and providing coverage to make sure everyone benefits, but targeting the thing so it can be affordable so we don't bankrupt the country. We're still grappling with that. Means testing is always very, very difficult because there are always hard cases that fall one side of the line or the other. But I suspect, as he tries to stabilise the public finances, the fact that Rishi Sunak is moving away from the triple lock will also reassure financial markets that the government won't have to make a 10.1% increase in the basic state pension that then lasts forever. And guess what? I think a lot of the pensioners, they'll moan about that, but many of them, as is tradition, will vote Tory anyway.
Yeah. We're also just learning very quickly that Rishi Sunak saying he's abandoned Liz Truss's supply-side reform plan. So, I mean, when we're looking at how the jigsaw fits on the 17th of November, I mean, what else can be done? I mean, for instance, we're being told that freezing the tax bans, the tax allowance bans, could save, what, $5 billion? That's not going to go that far, is it, when we're talking about 35 billion
It doesn't
black
save
hole?
any money. It means that more people are paying more of a stealth tax. It may make the government's finances look better, but, you know, the people earning that money won't feel that it's a saving. They'll feel that their money's being taken away from them. This is, of course, as you say, when the tax band stays where it is, even though earnings and inflation go up. So more people are dragged into the higher rate of tax. You know, we now have not particularly senior teachers. We have, you know, not particularly senior police officers, not particularly senior academics paying a higher rate of tax.
40% tax
These
rate,
are not wealthy people. And that's why what we call fiscal drag, when more and more people are dragged into these thresholds, is deeply unpopular. And the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will allow that to happen at their peril.
Right.
Cheers, Liam. Coming up, a cost of boozing crisis, as the average cost of a pint could hit the £7 mark in the coming months. We'll speak to an under-pressure brewer. And we'll also be discussing the migrant crisis, as there are concerns at a processing centre in Kent that tensions could boil over. Before that, time for a short break.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Rishi Sunak, in his speech in Downing Street yesterday, strongly reiterated the Conservative Party's 2019 manifesto commitment to level up. And at Prime Minister's Questions today, in response to a question from one of his own MPs, Philip Davis, he said, I can give him my cast-iron commitment to levelling up.
Well, he's, of course, reappointed an experienced man, Michael Gove, to the position of Levelling Up Secretary. So is it good news for the Northern Powerhouse? Let's speak to Chris Lloyd, who's Chief Features Writer at the Northern Echo, who's been following this issue in some detail. Chris, any evidence of levelling up so far, and what do you think Michael Gove could bring back to the table?
Well, now, levelling up is a fantastic slogan because it manages to mean all things to all politicians, whether it is raising up education standards in one part of our area or reconnecting old railway lines in another part of the area or regenerating high streets. So it means all things to all politicians. Michael Gove, so I'm in the classic Red Wall area of the Tees Valley, where we had seats like Bishop Auckland, even North West Durham, even Sedgefield, that fell to the Tories in 2019, sometimes for the first time since 1885. And they were really attracted by this promise of levelling up and of renewing high streets and just caring for these areas that feel forgotten about. And Michael Gove, when he was Levelling Up Secretary first time around, he came up with a 12-point plan, I think, in his white paper that all sorts of wonderful metrics and all sorts of promises, but how much of it is being seen on the ground is I think, debatable. There are some positives happening. I can talk about free ports, and I can talk about Treasury moving out of London to Darlington, but also child poverty in our area has risen in the last 6 years to 38%. So that's almost 2 in 5 children are being brought up in poverty. And that is the sort of thing that levelling up has to address. And I'm not sure how all this promise of tinkering with a few funds here and a few funds there is actually going to do that.
Chris, you mentioned those seats, those constituencies in the area where you have your readers, which fell from Labour to the Tories for the first time. You will have sensed that, because it was a great sense in the run-up to that 2019 election that they were going to go. Do you have any sense now about where those voters are? Do you have any sense about how they feel about the new Prime Minister?
That is such an interesting question, because when the Conservative Party was led by Liz Truss, it looked completely different, I think, to Red Wall voters than the Conservative Party that was led by Boris Johnson. That was a really different party, and you could feel people were really surprised by this new Liz Truss Prime Minister. Here we are a fascinating area because bordering, well, I'm actually speaking to you from Rishi Sunak's constituency of Richmond, and that looks over into the Tees Valley. And so he is known in this area. He knows of this area. He has been immersed in rural North Yorkshire since 2014, 2015. So he understands that. So we are a little bit different, perhaps, from places like Stoke, for example, which don't know Rishi Sunak personally. Here he has been trialling his free port policy, which was one of his big ideas when he was just a junior backbencher, really. 2016, he started talking about that, and he's kind of putting that into play on Teesside, and that could possibly be a real regenerator for Teesside, although there are kind of questions about whether it's just going to relocate business there from elsewhere. So people are aware of him here, and so he has a bit of a personal following, I think it's fair to say.
If they still like him after November the 17th. Chris, as ever, thanks for joining us up there from the Northern Echo. Thank you very much indeed.
Coming up, Harry and Meghan's status as royals. Some want them banned from standing in for the King. First, it's your news update.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he will rebuild public finances in a way that is fair and compassionate. In his first Prime Minister's questions, Mr Sunak promised to protect the most vulnerable as he addressed what he called mistakes of his predecessor Liz Truss. However, the heated debate was dominated by questions over his reappointment of the Home Secretary. Labour is calling for an investigation after Suella Braverman reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned from her role. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer questioned the new Prime Minister's decision.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account.
Well, Rishi Sunak had already defended the Home Secretary in his opening remarks.
The Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
In another U-turn of Liz Truss's policies, the new Prime Minister confirmed he will be reinstating the ban on fracking in England. Rishi Sunak told the Commons he stands by the Conservative 2019 manifesto pledge of banning drilling for shale gas. The Chancellor, meanwhile, has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be delivered next Monday, will be upgraded to an autumn statement. The Chancellor says it's important to reach the right decisions and that the new statement will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It will now be delivered on November the 17th. In other news, climate activists have targeted 2 luxury car showrooms. Just Stop Oil protesters sprayed orange paint on Ferrari and Bentley dealers in central London this morning. The Metropolitan Police say 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Now, fancy a drink? Well, maybe we ask Gloria.
Yes, please. Yes,
well,
are you
you're
offering me
getting
one?
the round in because we're being told the average price of a pint, wait for this, could be reaching more than £7 in the coming months.
Brewgooder, a Scottish brewer, is warning of record beer costs in some bigger cities as the conflict in Ukraine continues to drive up the price of raw ingredients, including wheat and barley.
Well, it's coupled with the soaring rents, energy prices, bringing challenges, of course, to an already struggling hospitality sector. Joining us now, Matt Pressinger, who's Marketing Director at Brewhouse and Kitchen in North London. Thanks very much for being with us. Are they trying to get the pints in now while they're still under £7 there?
Well, yeah, no, it's good that they're not quite £7 across most of our estate, but yeah, it's a challenging time. So as you mentioned in hospitality, full stop. It feels like it's been one thing after another between Brexit, COVID, and now the cost of living crisis. I think obviously energy is the big problem at the moment within the sector, but the single biggest cost in beer is duty. We're feeling the pressure. Malt keeps going up. We're quite fortunate at Brewhouse and Kitchen in the fact that we're actually a brew pub group. So you can see probably some of the equipment behind me here that we use to brew some of our beers on site in one of our 23 brew pubs. That means we are able to keep some of the costs down on some of our core products because we're not shipping it. We're pouring it directly where we're brewing the beer. But
yeah. I can see that's lager malt you got behind there, and obviously you have to use gases. I was just reading an extraordinary figure that CO2 has gone up 3,000%. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said. I mean, it's just one thing after another. We have our lagers contract brewed for us actually because it's such a high volume product that we're unable to sort of fulfil that volume within our microbreweries that we have within our pubs. So there's certain portions of our menu where unfortunately we do have to pass some of those costs on.
Matt,
yes.
Yeah, in the same article, I was reading the same article that Mark was reading, and what was interesting in the article also was that this £7 a pint would largely be confined to what it described as big cities. Why? Mm-hmm. Why?
Well,
if it's because of Ukraine and the rising cost of products and the rising costs of CO2, then why would it be cheaper to buy a pint in Nottinghamshire than in London?
Sure, I think the cost of operating in different areas of the country differ. So for example, in our London sites, it is more expensive for a variety of reasons, and as a result, we have a slightly different price band attached to our sites in London. For the most of our estate, I was just taking a look at the pricing, obviously, before coming on this call. £4.80, we've still held our entry-level lager across the majority of our estate, but that's not in London. It does depend, obviously, where you're operating.
Of the ladies out there, is my glass of wine safe? Is the price of my glass of wine going to go up?
Well, I think, the pressures are coming across the board, so obviously we're talking right now about the cost of brewing. We could easily be talking about food. We could be talking about energy. We could be talking about wine. We could be talking about the import duty on some of the beers that we've had to delist because we just can't get hold of them from Europe anymore. So obviously we're focusing here talking about beer, but ultimately the truth is that the pressure is across the board on our entire menu.
Yeah, and we were being told that the alcohol duty was going to be cut across the board. That no longer seems to be the case. We'll learn more, of course, on November the 17th. What do you think the government should be doing to help?
I think that's where they've got to look, ultimately. It is the duty. That was a real disappointment to us to hear that. That's where we need the support. And we need the support anywhere we can get it, to be perfectly frank. As I say, the cost of goods is one, labour is another. But there is a labour shortage within the industry too.
Would you welcome a relaxation on immigration rules on that point that you made about Labour?
Well, I think, we've sort of come out of Brexit and a lot of that's been buried by COVID and now the cost of living crisis. And I think we've got to reflect on the fact that we've gone through a huge period of change. And that's not just to do with the pandemic, and that's not just to do with the full crisis in relation to the war. There's also a big change in terms of what happened for us in terms of Brexit. So I do think that needs to be taken a look at as well. Absolutely.
So tell us, how vital then is this Christmas for the industry and the sector to really enable people to keep afloat?
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely vital. We've been reflecting on a lot at Brewhouse and Kitchen. It's the first time in 3 years, really, that we could have an an unprohibitive Christmas. No restrictions in place. Last year, we were doing really well in terms of pre-booked covers across the estate, and then that started to fall away as the restrictions and warnings came back in. So we're really, really hoping across the entire industry for a really strong Christmas period, finally, after all these years of waiting for 2022. Absolutely.
How can we all support our local boozer?
Buy me a drink.
But apart from paying, which doesn't involve spending £7 on a pint.
Yeah, well, I think it's how can we all support each other. I think we also feel that there's a certain sense of social responsibility around not pricing people out. I think that pubs historically in Great Britain have, fulfill the really important duty of being a social space for everyone. And we want nothing more than to be inclusive and have everyone feel welcome and able to sort of use the space. So it really is a case of us supporting one another. We'll do our best if you can keep coming and having a beer with us.
Yeah, Matt, I think we'll say cheers to you and good luck in that month or so ahead. Thanks very much indeed for bringing us the latest snapshot of the industry, and hope things get a bit better for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, as Suella Braverman resumes her role in charge at the Home Office, her top priority is the growing small boats crisis.
Yeah, the latest figures, 38,000 people arriving so far this year on these small boats. And GB News can reveal the authorities now deeply concerned, as they say, for the potential for serious disorder at one of the main migrant processing places, the centre in Kent. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is there. Mark, what's the problem? Because clearly the numbers are increasing. Is it just not large enough to cope with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons. The facility was designed to take a maximum of 1,500 people who were being processed. This is the main processing centre. If you come across the English Channel, you'll be processed initially for an hour or two in Dover, then you're taken here. The maximum stay was only ever designed to be 24, 48 hours, up to a capacity of 1,500. And then you would be off to interim accommodation. However, that number is now doubled. There's about 3,000 here at the moment, and there are some of them have been here for weeks in less than ideal condition, in effectively big marquees, housing about 150 at a time, all sleeping together. There are violent incidents. Just before you came to me, a neighbour here, one of the neighbouring farms, said he hears them, the fights that break out pretty much every night. The police are called here constantly. On Monday night, we were told that there were 7 separate security incidents that staff had to deal with. And authorities, according to sources that we've been speaking to, are very concerned that it may only be a matter of time before there is effectively a riot here. The same kind of thing that we saw at Napier barracks over a year ago during COVID, when people were cooped up there in overcrowded conditions and set fire to those barracks. The Chief Inspector of Borders, the independent Chief Inspector, David Neal, has been giving evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee in the Commons today, and he backed up the concerns of those that I've been speaking to, saying that he was here on Monday night and was shocked at what he saw. This is what he said to the Commons Committee.
It was of the order of nearly 2,500 people who were being guarded by non-trained detainee custody officers. So they're being guarded by a mixture of immigration enforcement officers and security guards. It was sufficiently alarming when I discovered that. I was frankly speechless.
Is that the sources have told me that they are one of the factors behind much of the rise in tensions is not just the overcrowding, that is clearly a key factor, but also a change in the demographics of those who are arriving here. The majority of those now coming here are Albanians, and few, if any, would ever in the long term qualify for asylum. And of course, the vast majority, we're told, don't want to be in here in the first place. They want to disappear off and work in the illegal economy, or worse and more worrying, to work for criminal gangs.
Mark, down in Manston in Kent, thanks very much for updating us on the position down there. Thank you.
Now, peers, that's members of the House of Lords, have suggested a change in the law so that the Duke of Sussex and Duke of York lose their stand-in status as councillors of state. Let's discuss this a little more with our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Why does the King need stand-ins, first of all?
Right, so as councillors of state, the whole point being if the King goes abroad on a tour, or if he becomes ill, or if he becomes incapacitated and can no longer carry out his duties as King, councillors of state are effectively there on standby to carry out state's business. The most recent example of this taking place was when the then Prince Charles and Prince William stood in for Her Majesty the Queen at the state opening of Parliament earlier this year. Now, as it stands under the Regency Act 1937, which was amended in 1943, the councillors of state are the monarch's spouse and then the four heirs to the throne over the age of 21. So as it stands, the councillors of state are the Queen Consorts, Camilla, Prince William, Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, and Prince Andrew's oldest daughter, Princess Beatrice. Now, of course, lots of people are now raising the question, Prince Andrew, Prince Harry and Princess Beatrice are not working members of the royal family, so is this appropriate?
Yeah, and the papers have sort of put it as that Harry and Andrew sidelined, but clearly it goes beyond that because this is a constitutional role as such. And if, for instance, the King and the Queen Consort are away on a foreign trip and something blows up, as governments have done in recent weeks, this is an essential constitutional role they have to undertake.
Well, exactly, and we are expecting the King and the Queen Consorts to travel abroad next year. There has to be two councillors of state carrying out duties of state. So therefore, yes, Prince William as Prince of Wales will clearly be involved, but that still leaves the question that the other councillors of state available are all non-working members of the royal family. So from my understanding, there have been talks over the last couple of months between palace officials and government ministers as to try and rectify the law to allow perhaps only working members of the royal family be councillors of state, which would lead the way for Prince Edward and Princess Anne to perhaps take up the role.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about the Princess role, because clearly she has been at the King's side during this time, Balmoral particularly, when the Queen was very ill. It was Princess Anne who was at the Queen's bedside and basically brought Prince Charles in, so, you know, a key role within the family.
Yes, and Princess Anne is currently in Africa. I believe she's in Uganda, undertaking a royal tour there, representing the monarchy abroad, representing Britain abroad. Unlike Prince Harry, who is in California, unlike Prince Andrew, who is dubbed kind of the royal dog keeper, as it were.
And binge-watching box sets was how the papers sort of painted it as well. I mean, is that a fair assessment, what Prince Andrew's doing at the moment?
Well, perhaps. We don't know exactly what Prince Andrew's doing, but what we know he's doing is keeping out of the spotlight.
Exactly.
It was a Labour peer whose name is Viscount Stansgate, who raised this issue in the House of Lords yesterday and was asking the question specifically about Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, whether it is appropriate, and I think we'll have to wait to see if any legislation starts to pass through Parliament in the next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what box sets they may be. However, we'll leave that to one side. Cameron, as ever, thanks very much for bringing us the latest.
Now, new data shows that more than 7 in 10 NHS trusts have failed to see patients who are urgently referred for suspected cancer within its key 2-week target.
Yeah, well, that number of hospitals failing to hit the national target for referrals, the highest it's been for at least 3 years. Joining us now, Sean Walsh, who's Head of Public Affairs and Campaigning at Cancer Research UK. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I know that Macmillan Trust are basically saying it's a good thing that we're talking about the referrals, and it may be that because of lockdown, we've got this logjam of too many people coming through at the same time to get referrals.
Thanks for having me on, Gloria and Mark. I think I would just say at the start that it's encouraging that people are getting into the system. So more people are being referred, because you're right, that was a real challenge and a concern. But the real issue is that we simply do not have enough staff in the NHS. We do not have enough kit in the NHS to diagnose people with cancer soon enough. And this is a real challenge. So the statistic you cited was really important. Another one, there are 10 times more people waiting 6 weeks or more for key diagnostic tests now in August 2022 than there was compared to August 2019. So in numbers, that's 315,000 people waiting longer for 6 weeks or more compared to 32,800 than before. And obviously, each of these statistics is a human being, is a family member. 1 in 2 of us will get cancer in our lifetime. And whilst we've made huge strides, particularly through the work we've done at Cancer Research UK and investing in research, we've made huge strides in improving survival, more than doubled survival over the last 40 years. We are really concerned that actually we're at a point where we may start to see that survival figure slip back. So it's critical as we have a new government, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, committed to delivering a better NHS. They also need to deliver on the Conservative Party manifesto commitment in 2019, which was to improve survival.
Sean, when we look through these figures and this 7 out of 10 trust, are there particular regions of the country that do better than others that we should learn from?
Well, it's a mixed picture, I have to say, Gloria, and it's not. Each NHS trust is operating in a slightly different area. We know that Birmingham and the East Midlands has been a real challenging area. We know there are other parts of the country where, so we look at Calderdale and Huddersfield, for example, which are doing much, much better. But the overall picture is, sadly, we're missing these targets. We were missing these targets pre-COVID. So this is not a new phenomena, but what's happened is COVID has exacerbated that challenge. The government has an opportunity. They have a 10-year cancer plan sitting in the new Health Secretary's in tray, Steve Barclay. We made our submission to that cancer plan in April 2022 this year, setting out a number of areas in which we could make progress. I've talked about improving early diagnosis. I've talked about improving workforce. But actually, one thing we could do is the prevention agenda. How do we prevent people getting cancer in the first place? Smoking is still responsible for 150 cancers a day. So if we could take movement and measures on things like smoking and obesity, we could bring down the pressure on the NHS and hopefully get people through the system much more quickly. But it's a real challenge.
Sean from Cancer Research, thank you very much indeed for chatting to us today.
Thank you.
Let's hope those stats improve.
Yeah. Well, that's it from us on GB Newsday, with plenty happening on the political front.
Up next, it's GB News Live with Patrick Chrisses. Before that, it is your weather.
Hello, the rest of this week and in fact into the weekend remains fairly changeable. A mixture of some sunny spells, some showers, perhaps longer spells of rain at times. It will though be exceptionally mild for the time of year despite the rather breezy conditions. Now we can see on the chart low pressure in charge, closely packed isobars indicating the strength of the wind and various weather fronts sweeping across the country at times over the coming few days. The first one cleared away nicely this morning, leaving in its wake a mixture of bright or sunny spells and a scattering of showers. Some of those showers have been on the heavy side, but we see some more persistent showery rain edging in from the southwest overnight tonight and into the early